Good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. We're going to start, so if we can all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next, now it works. Go ahead and go to the roll call, and we'll start with Clay.
Oh, just roll call.
Yeah.
Clay, Bill.
Brian Elkins.
Javier Marquez.
Devin Avilas.
Jared Samard.
Bill Dietrich.
Ben Pittman.
Ralph Pistoresi.
Kevin Herman.
Public comment. The first 15 minutes of each regular session is set aside for members of the public to comment on any item within the jurisdiction of the committee, but not appearing on the agenda. For items appearing on the agenda, the public is invited to comment at the time the item is called for consideration by the committee. Any person addressing the committee under public comment will be limited to a 3-minute presentation to ensure that all interested parties have an opportunity to speak. Please submit any handouts to the recording secretary. Do we have any public comments?
I do. As being on this committee, it's a good opportunity to give a lot of thought to what's happening in Madera and what can possibly happen to Madera. Sometimes things are better expressed in a poem. So I have a poem that I'd like to share with you that may weigh heavy on your minds as we consider all the options before us. Let me put glasses on so I can see what I'm reading. This poem is called "This Garden We Knew." In fields straight with precision laid, where almonds, peaches, and grapes were made, where figs and prunes and cherries grew, now desert, this garden we knew. Slowly with malice they plotted their course, with new regulations we must endorse. Engine emissions first lie to believe, the world's too hot from carbon it's seen. This lie only one in a series to come. No, don't think, with us they were done. Nothing we owned now complies from outrageous laws passed with pride. Engines outlawed to pump water we need. We're destined to be felons, all, I believe. Tractors and trucks perfect to drive, red tagged, dangerous, cast aside. What we owned, paid in full, we must discard to indebt anew, as we're forced to do. Farm water metered, lab tested too. Nothing without permission can we do. They hand you sorrow for the public good, stole from the productive all ways they could. They want our farms' livelihood gone, and did it all with penalties strong. They want disappear, I strongly believe. They want all to disappear, I strongly believe. Our towns to languish, businesses close, beauty we cherished, gone, all we know. This because common sense from laws did leave, and those that stole freedom not hung from trees. That's the truth.
Thank you, Ralph. Any other public comment? Seeing none.
Let the record reflect that committee member Maxwell has entered and is on the dais.
Thank you. On to item number 5, implementation of SB 252. Dexter Moore.
Good afternoon. Committee. Good afternoon, committee. Dexter Marr, Environmental Health Deputy Director. Thank you for having me here today. I just wanted to kind of briefly talk about some legislative that passed back in the end of 2017, Senate Bill 252. And what that bill requires is it gives the permitting agency, so we are the permitting agency for well applications, and what it does is it requires by January of 2020 that all well applications that come through our division, we have to either post it online or generate it somehow where the public is capable of reviewing the applications or just as notification. And I'll briefly read what the summary is on the bill. So this bill will require a city or county overlaying a critically overdraft basin as defined to request estimates of certain information from an applicant for a new well located within a critically overdraft basin as part of the application for a well permit. The bill will require the city or county that receives an application for a well permit in a critically overdraft basin to make the information about the new well included in the application for a well permit available to both the public and to the groundwater sustainability agencies and easily accessible. So our division this week actually met with Stephanie, Director of Natural Water Resource, and we are actually drafting up our supplemental application that's going to be included with our existing well application. So once we get that finalized, we'll have a draft here sometime maybe August, September, and we have no problems of sharing that draft with you guys if you would like to review it before we make it official. And also, we are working with our IT department to determine how we are going to do the posting, whether we are going to put it on the environmental health website or we'll do some type of notification. Currently, right now, Tulare County, San Diego, and Monterey County already started Senate Bill 252. So if you look on their website under well application, they already have that process in place. So if you just want to look at it just to see what they're requiring, that information is available now. There are other counties that have started the process, but they are not going online. They are just having a list of anybody who wants to be on the list, and we do email notifications. I think right now we are pushing toward putting it on our website, and so we'll be working with our IT on that. So as I get further information, I'll share it with Stephanie, and I'll be happy to share it with the committee. I'm available for any questions.
We'll start with the committee. Any questions?
So what you're saying in real simple terms is if you need to drill a well because your well's bad and you have an existing well, you have to drill another well. You have to go before the county, you have to go before a committee, you have to go before the public to get water out of your ground.
No, so it's really kind of vague. So what it really states is if an application comes in through environmental health, we take it in, we process it, we post it online, but we can still move forward and issue a permit. It just, in here, it just states that we have to make that information available before we process the permit.
Why?
I'm just reading what the Senate bill
Did
is.
they already pass the law?
Yes, it
Already
passed in late 2017.
So in other words, whenever you want to do something in your house, pretty soon, you have to put it online publicly so everybody can either agree or disagree. And if they disagree, then what happens?
I know, it's like I said, it's really vague, and we're working with Stephanie and her group, and we'll probably work with council as well, because I'm sure things will come up, but just briefly, what I just stated is what they're requiring the counties to do.
Well, I would be kind of opposed to anything that was vague that you're agreeing to, because you might not like what comes after it. So what is the process? They should have the whole process in place. As an example, this is what's going to happen. If the public is against it, then what's going to happen? And how is it going to affect you?
Yeah, I mean, that are great questions. And like I said, we'll work also with, we're actually in the process of contacting Tulare County as well, since they're the closest county. And we're talking with them to see, right, all these other scenarios that come up. So we're working with other counties as well to make sure when we do implement this, that we're prepared.
Are we forced to implement this?
Yes.
Might I jump in?
Yeah, Stephanie.
The county fully intends to comply with the law, and Dexter is going to come up with a process in his group. We'll propose the process to your advisory committee and get feedback on it.
I have a question. Sort of a two-part question. Ages and ages ago, a well driller told me I had to make the application myself. This is in the foothills. More recently, I drilled a well, and he said the contractor, him, had to make the application. Now, it appears that I will have to make the application again. That's the first part. Second part of my question is, can you say definitely what the turnaround time from application till approval will be?
Well, the first part is, actually, a contractor can still submit an application. The property owner just has to sign the forms, but it can be submitted by the contractor. The second part is our normal process, as long as we receive an application that is complete, accurate, correct, our normal process is 3 days to process a permit from beginning to end.
No, under the new law.
It's the same process.
3 days?
We will still do the same, we'll still follow that process.
With the public
It's just
notice and
that,
all?
once we receive everything that's accurate, complete, we just have to post it, but we'll still follow our 3-day minimum for processing the permit.
Will that include approval of a depth,
Yes,
pre-approval?
yes.
Will that include the entire county or just what we call the white area?
It's actually, well, it'll include the whole county, because I'm sorry, it doesn't cover the foothill areas, but you cover the valley floor. Any area that's considered overage draft, which most of our basins are.
That's what I heard. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And there are some exemptions in here, and I didn't read them because there's quite a few, but like, this bill really is geared toward ag, industrial, and dairy. It does have an exemption for de minimis users.
Go ahead, Ralph.
What I would like to point out is that I'm very much opposed to things having always to go before the public. The public, the public, the public. As you saw in the poem, a lot of sorrow is handed out on behalf of the public good. This is part of the sorrow that you're beginning to hand out on behalf of the public good. And I think as long as there's no reason why some law has to be put on the burden of a law on the people of the state, that there's no reason for it, other than to just burden us with another law. Just keep it in mind.
May I respond briefly?
Yes.
I just wanted to clarify, when things are posted on the website, they're not actually posted for public approval. They're simply posted. So really, the burden has been shifted to the county in terms of the workload, not anyone else. We're adding to county workload. But these wells are not up for public approval. The county still makes that decision.
Okay. Is our name or just address posted on?
Actually, it's the whole application.
See, that's-
Like I said, if you have a chance, look at Tulare County, Monterey, San Diego. They already have it posted, and they submit the full application. That what comes in, they just put it online. And they put it up for 30 days, posted.
So they take it down?
Yes, after 30 days.
So it's not a comment period, it's not a review, it's just a posting.
Yes.
Now, a question I have for you, Dexter, is obviously this doesn't go into effect until 2020, so if anybody in the audience were thinking about drilling a well or replacing a well, if they were to submit their application prior to December 31st, 2019, they would not have to go through this review period or
Correct.
public.
That is correct, unless we implement it earlier. Just depends on when we start the process. But I'm guessing we will probably start it first of the year.
Well, and the only comment I would make to that is if it looked like there was a potential for that starting earlier, I think we should have plenty of notice.
Sure, that's not a problem.
Okay. Kevin?
Dexter, I'm just wondering, in the other counties where it's already been implemented, if there's been any challenges in terms of privacy. I was just wondering if, I'm not real crazy about the idea of anybody and everybody in the county knowing my business. So has anybody challenged it, or has there been any talk about challenging it from that perspective?
At this point, I haven't heard anything, but like I said, our staff, since we just started this process, our staff are just reaching out to the other counties just to ask those certain questions, just so we can be prepared to answer and find out what our legal, requirement is. And I'm sure we'll work with council as well.
Perhaps if you put the APN, if you have the ability to put the APN but not the entity's name, that might be something that would be appreciated on our part.
Yeah, we'll look into that as we move further.
Thank you.
And you will come back to the committee before we proceed.
I'm working closely with Stephanie, and then we'll reach out whenever she believes is the best timing to do that.
Okay. Any additional comments from the committee?
This applies to any well, tip well or domestic?
Yeah, so this actually applies mostly only to ag, industrial, or dairy, because they're an exception for de minimis users. So domestic use, right, we wouldn't include them in that.
Anybody else from the committee? Seeing none?
Yeah, just one quick comment, is that unfortunately, our state associations are so busy tamping out prairie fires on legislation that's coming out of the state capitol that they can't get everyone stopped. And I don't even remember hearing about this one, but it's unfortunate when it gets to the county level and the county is forced to enforce the law. But where this debate has to take place is early on when the legislation is being proposed and written. And the only way we can fight that is through engagement with our associations that deal with the state legislature in Sacramento.
Christina? Yes. Just-
Thanks, Bill. So a couple of things. One, do you have a timeline on when this is going to kind of start, at least the process? Because it's my understanding that there's, for well replacements, as long as you're intending to extract the same amount, you don't have to do this. And then second, that there's a workaround, if you will, in that if the county or the city adopts a ordinance that says this is how we deal with this, that's doable. So, like, do you have a process of how this is going to, do you have a timeline and a process and how this is going to work? And I know you're working with Stephanie, but what is the stakeholder engagement look like?
That's a good question. So we actually just met, like I said, last week, and I think what we have scheduled is I think we're meeting monthly as we move forward, and I guess I'll just work with Stephanie to figure out a timeline and at what point should we come back here to the committee and inform you guys as we move forward. First thing right now is we're just working on the draft because there are certain language and requirements that we have to put on the application that is stated on here. And then just with that alone, I mean, we'll share that draft with the committee and then I guess a timeline as we feel comfortable working with our IT and finding out exactly when we can start working on getting the posting on what we have to do, as a division to get this implemented. And then we'll inform you as our time process goes as well. And we're happy to do that. Since we started, I can't really give you an exact time frame, but like I said, we are going to meet monthly, either on conference call or here at the office to work this out. But Stephanie does have informed me that we do want to have you guys involved, and we'll keep you guys posted as much as we can.
Just out of personal request, in your preparing this vague establish, I wouldn't like my name or business address or phone number to be removed from a posting on a website if you're going to post the application. I think any personal, I mean, some applications I put my home address. Why would I want, you know, no one would want them to have your home address, in my opinion. So just personal information is what I think
All right,
shouldn't be
we'll look
on the
into
app. Post it, I guess you can say.
Kevin?
One last question for Dexter. De minimis well sort of are exempt from this. Is there a definition, or is that something you're going to endeavor to determine as what is the definition of a de minimis well?
You know, they have it in here, and, you know, I didn't read the section, but if it's in here, it just has a meaning providing in section 10721. And so I apologize, I didn't bring that section, but I'll look at it. But it's in here, and I gave Stephanie some copies to hand out to the committee, and if you guys get a chance to look at it.
Because that'd be insightful for, I mean, let's just say hypothetically, it's a well that's less than 400 feet in deep and less than 12 inches in diameter or something like that. I mean, there may be opportunities for all of us to consider utilizing some of these shallower, smaller diameter wells. So that'd be helpful information to have.
Greg?
Am I on? Yeah. So this water code section that Dexter just quoted is from the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. It's the same de minimis definition, which is 2 acre-feet or less for domestic use. So I don't think you could, per year. Yeah, so yeah, I don't think just a small ag well would count.
Had it shatter my bubble.
I'm sorry, Kevin. I do that a lot to you.
Do we have any additional public comment? Seeing none, Dexter, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Moving on to item number 6, website update. Stephanie and Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to give a quick update on our website. We've made some changes to make it more accessible. So first update, I wanted to let you know that we have an event calendar. If you look at the giant yellow arrow,
Stephanie, let me stop you real quick. We're not seeing the same presentation up here on the monitors.
do you see a presentation?
I just look over.
We're good.
Yeah. We had to press the button, sorry.
Just as bad here.
Or reboot, right? So under an events tab right up there, we have an event calendar. So if you click on events, you'll see something like you see on the right, and it's an interactive calendar. And we post events that we know about that people send to us in the department. So if you know of something that's not there, you need to make sure you're sending it to us. We'll also post the agenda there. If you go back in time to 2018, we've also put presentations up there. So it's still active if you wanted to look at old presentations. And then we have another way. If you want to look at old presentations, we have a presentations tab added, and then we've divided the presentations by subbasin. They're all listed by their name. So if you wanted to go back and look at slides, you could. Just trying to make things more accessible for the public. That concludes my presentation on website updates made by Ms. Kim Witten. I'd be glad to take your questions.
Does the committee have any questions? Seeing none, any public comment?
Thank you.
Wayne, please, you have to come up to the lectern. Thank you.
So official. Stephanie, I just wanted to say I went on that a week ago maybe. It would be nice if, rather than just the event appearing, time and place, there were no times nor places.
It does have the time, so you're going to need to click in on the month, right? Click on the event, and then the time and the place should pop up. They all have one, because we can't add an event without a time.
So you have to click on the event. And
Click on the event itself, and you get a page, and that'll also have the agenda or a presentation.
more information. Okay. Thank you. That was it.
Sorry, I should have said that.
Christina?
I just want to say thank you. I didn't mean to cause more work, but thank you for accommodating.
Not a problem.
Any additional public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 7, update on subbasins and calendar. Stephanie?
Okay. A few folks have asked us what the county has done in terms of the GSAs and how many grants we've been awarded, and are we aggressively going after those grants? So I'm going to review those just so that you have some of those numbers top of mind. So in terms of grants for Sigma, we've been awarded $5.9 million. We had an award of $5 million for GSP development and groundwater monitoring wells in severely disadvantaged communities. That was the largest award in the state of California. We also received the Stress Basins Grant for $500,000, which kickstarted the groundwater sustainability plan development by doing data gap analysis, which is basically a list of what we know and what we don't know and where the gaps are, as well as the HCM, the hydrologic conceptual model. So $5.9 million for Sigma-related grants. We are doing the grant administration for those all in-house. We've received a significant component of flood-related grants, and as you all know, flood and the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act are very much connected. So I made a list, actually, Dario Dominguez, the flood engineer, made a list of these. We have $5 million between the Ash and Brenda Slough for Arundo and sediment removal. Those grants are still open. We have $2.5 million for repair of levee breaks on the Fresno River. The only grant in this list that's closed right now is the development of a stormwater resource plan, which we did for $175,000 in grant funds. We also have identifying culverts that need replacement, developing strategic plans countywide for flood fighting. It's an emergency action plan. And then the development of SWIFT, which is a system-wide infrastructure plan for replacement to get us back into one of the flood programs, the PL 8499. So $9.3 million in flood funds. So I just want you to know that we are working very hard to get grant funds for the county. That helps everybody. That decreases tax costs because someone else is paying.
Someone else. That's me.
Well, the state is paying, and we all pay state taxes, but they're distributed over a larger population, not just the folks in this county. So for the Madera Subbasin, I wanted to make sure everybody knew chapters 1 and 2 were released, and they're on our website. There is an email and a form, maderacountywater.com. The appendices for chapter 2 are under review now. They're pretty substantial. They're 500 plus pages, and they're with the technical experts. So when they're ready, we will also release those. May 29th is a big day for both the Madera and Chowchilla subbasins. For Madera, there's a meeting here in the board chambers from 2 to 5. We're going to talk about minimum thresholds and measurable objectives. And consulting team from David's Engineering is going to propose a methodology. Chowchilla, there's the same meeting day, May 29th, but it's 10 to 12 in the Portuguese Hall in Chowchilla. Same topics on the agenda. The Delta Mendota has scheduled their next round of workshops for next week in Patterson, Los Banos, Santanella, and Mendota. They have been working on proposed water budgets for the county-wide areas as well as the sustainable management criteria. So to tee up the next item, I'm going to review the existing recommendations from the advisory committee. These are all recommendations that you made that I took to the Board of Supervisors, which is also the Board of Directors for all 3 county GSA subbasins. So back in February, your committee recommended that as part of the GSP, native groundwater be allocated equally across irrigated and unirrigated land within the county GSAs. And then in March, the committee recommended that as part of the initial modeling efforts, groundwater pumping in the county decreased over time approximately 2% a year from 2020 to 2040. And then there were two recommendations in April. The committee recommended that credits be given for activities that introduce new water into the subbasins, and new water was water we had not already counted. And then the committee also recommended that the credits were evaluated by an outside entity, potentially in a relationship the county has with the university, and that would establish the quantity of water to be credited. So that concludes the update on subbasins and calendar items. I'd be glad to take your questions.
Does the committee, Ralph?
Stephanie, these recommendations that we made,
Yep.
our GSA has to come together with all the other GSAs in the county and have a comprehensive plan, correct? That's the goal, isn't it?
So there is no requirement that there is one comprehensive plan for the subbasin. You
There's
can
no-
have multiple plans.
Multiple plans. So if there's 2 or 3 areas, different groups, they can have a different plan, and the state doesn't want a unified plan? I thought that was the whole thing.
The state wants a unified vision. The plans have to work together cooperatively. Right now in the Madera subbasin, there are 4 GSPs now, and we're attempting to coordinate, meaning we're using the same data. We're coming to the same conclusions.
If our recommendations need to be tweaked a little bit to bring them more together in alignment, is that still something possible?
Yes, you could change your recommendation. We could modify it, and I could take it back to the board of directors. That said, some of those recommendations came at a point we needed in order for the modeling to
Right.
occur.
Right. I don't
Like
mean a
the-
lot, I mean just a little bit.
Well, I'm curious what specifically that might mean, and I would expect it to come up in the next item.
Okay.
Anybody else from the committee have any comments or questions for Stephanie?
Yeah, can we explain exactly what the February 12th recommendation means? Because I'm not sure that all the committee members understand what native groundwater means. Is that the equivalent of transition water?
No. Yeah, so Greg does have a pretty robust explanation of that in the next item, but let me just say this. Native groundwater is water that is a combination of precipitation and percolation from rivers and streams. So it's water that's here naturally, I guess you could think of it. And it's water that is considered very close to the sustainable yield. Sustainable yield also involves looking at other things, but that number is close to that. So that is what we have been talking about potentially setting up trading around. And that number is what was distributed equally across irrigated and non-irrigated land. At least that was the recommendation.
So do we save discussion for after Greg's presentation?
I think
Or do
it's
you
a
want to have
great-
it now?
No, I think we should wait for Greg.
Very well. Because that 10-to-1 vote, if I recall correctly, I was the one, correct?
No, it's Mr. Pisaresi.
Was I at that meeting? Did I miss that meeting?
It was Ralph.
Do we have any more committee member comment? Seeing none, do we have any public questions, comments for Stephanie? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 8, allocation of existing storm groundwater discussion and recommendations to be presented by Stephanie and Greg. And one point of order that I want to make, what we're about to see is going to be difficult for many of us in this room. What I would like to ask out of everybody is to give our presenters, remember, they're just presenting what the law is requiring. So I ask everyone to be respectful, and there's going to be people that may have differing opinions. That's okay. We're here to try to figure this out. So with that being said, we'll move forward with Stephanie and Greg.
Thank you, Devin. So there's a fair amount embedded in this presentation, and I've tried to set it up so we can address some of the questions such as what was just asked about the native groundwater and how that differentiates from what we might call transition water and some of those other discussions. So there's a lot here. We can pause at times, and if I feel like it might be something we'll answer further in the slides, I'll have you table it and we'll come back to those questions and see if we answer it. But at the same time, if there's something to stop on and we want to talk about a little bit, I think it's okay to have just kind of a general dialogue during the middle of this presentation if you find something that we need to try and clarify. Does that sound good? All right. So one of the things that we want to start out with is we are talking about the GSAs, the Madera County GSAs in the Chowchilla Basin. I think this has the Chowchilla Basin, which is right here. Sorry, you guys won't see that on your screens. You'll have to look, at least from the dais up here, and the Madera Subbasin, which is the larger of the two areas. Those are the subbasins that the county is involved with. The GSAs the county has established are these shaded areas in each one. So in the Chowchilla Subbasin, you see this area down on the western side, and then some up here towards the north and eastern edge.
And for the moment, we're going to set the Delta Mendota Subbasin aside because we haven't seen data from that subbasin, whereas Greg and I are heavily involved in the Madera and Chowchilla subbasins.
Thank you. So yeah, all of this conversation is going to focus on these two subbasins. So as you can see just from this, the county GSA in the Madera subbasin is many more acres in total area, and it's over here on the side. Chowchilla subbasin, the county GSA is about 42,500 acres with about 35,000 irrigated. In the Madera subbasin, 178,000 acres and about 85,000 of that irrigated. So the rest of the area you see in each of these is covered by another GSA. Like for instance, up here in Chowchilla, this is Chowchilla Water District. Down here, this is Madera Irrigation District, and you have Root Creek, and you have New Stone, I believe, is here, and Triangle T. So I mean, those are the other spaces that you see in here. So we're focusing on what's hashed in these two subbasins for this presentation. There will be times I just say Chowchilla subbasin or Madera subbasin, and I'm talking about the GSAs within those. Does that make sense? So let's talk about determining sustainable water supplies. So the consulting team that is putting together the GSP developed a water budget for each subbasin that included several values that they developed. I'm not going to touch on them all here, but several of the important ones were total consumptive use, or evapotranspiration for the entire subbasin, total consumptive use of applied water, so that portion of the ET that's met with irrigation for the irrigated lands, infiltration of rainfall, so that part of rainfall that's not meeting ET, it's percolating below the root zone, and infiltration of water in streams and channels. So it's that natural storm water that's seeping in as opposed to the introduced water that's imported maybe during the irrigation season. There was obviously a significant amount of other data, and this looked back at data over 25, 30 years of average data, so it captures ups and downs. And from this, we developed, and have discussed before, this term called native groundwater for each of the subbasins. So that's the total infiltration of rainfall plus the natural water in the streams and channels. As Stephanie had just noted, that's kind of what would be here down in the basin, absent importation of other water supplies that might also be seeping. So estimating the native groundwater. So the native groundwater in the entire subbasin was estimated in Chowchilla to be about 67,000 acre feet a year. So again, that's on average. Some years you might have more rainfall, like this year, and other years you might have less. Madera, about 175,000 acre feet. Remember, that's in the entire subbasin. So now we needed to proportionally share to each GSA within that basin. So that native groundwater there, some of it is to lands that are in Chowchilla Water District, Madera Irrigation District, all the other GSAs. So that was proportioned out to each GSA. The county GSA in the Chowchilla subbasin has about 21,000 of this 67,000. So you can see it's about 1/3. In the county GSA in the Madera subbasin, about 90,000 of that 175,000. So about 50% of the water equates. That's because in that, if you remember back to the map, about 50% of the land in the Madera subbasin is in the Madera County GSA. So this is the proportionality. And, oh, this is my animation. So, yeah, we forget. That's what happens when you add things last minute and you don't get to put the animation on it. So the current use exceeds the native groundwater, the sustainable native groundwater. In the county GSA, in the Chowchilla subbasin, current use is about 82,000 acre-feet. Now, this is the use that is for the irrigated agriculture. So that's part down on the bottom here. This does not include the domestic water use that was subtracted out already. So the 82,000 you see here, there is additional use by domestic users, and some of the small community systems are on top of that 82,000, so they're not included in this number. The native groundwater, as we just said in that prior slide, is 21,000. So we current use 82,000. We only have sustainable groundwater of 21,000. In the county GSA in Madera subbasin, we have, as we showed before, a lot bigger bucket. There's current use is 190,000 because there's a lot more acres. But we only have 90,000 acre-feet of native groundwater. So in both these cases, there needs to be this transition. This is what SGMA required, that by 2040, you're supposed to be managing down to this level. So the reduction in the total county GSA groundwater pumping in each basin from current to the native groundwater has to occur by 2040. So this is going back to some of the decisions of, push the wrong button. That there's kind of a planned linear drop over these 20 years of implementation from 2020 to 2040 to get from the current use to our native groundwater, and then from there on, that native groundwater out through 2090, because you're supposed to be sustainable for a 50-year period. That's what the Act requires. That's why we go out to 2090 in the modeling and analysis. That is now going to be working with just that smaller native groundwater bucket. Additionally, there's opportunities to import more water, do recharge projects, other things that have been discussed. Right now, we're not talking about those pieces. We're talking about this groundwater part, right? In March, the advisory committee recommended a 10% reduction in the total use the first 5 years at about 2% per year, and the remaining reduction on a consistent annual basis. It's 2% of that total use, so that 190 that's in the Madera Basin, talking about 2% reduction of that. So that's close to, what does that come up to be, about 40,000 acre-feet, 20,000 acre-feet a year? No, sorry, 4,000 acre-feet a year. Quick math, you know? Believe me, I am an engineer, right? So when you look at what the numbers might equate to in the Chowchilla subbasin, the Madera County GSA and the Chowchilla subbasin, in the first 5 years, that equates to about an annual reduction of a little over 2,000 acre-feet a year. The last 15 years of that implementation period, about 3,500 acre-feet a year for that total reduction of 62,000 acre-feet. So you recall the bucket of existing use. We got to get down to 21,000 in the sustainable period. And I realize maybe that should be 61,000 so if the math is done right. In Madera, we have 47,500 estimated to be the annual reduction in the first 5 years, bumping up to about 5,500 in the subsequent 15 years, equating to a total reduction of about 100,000 acre-feet that has to occur. These are big numbers. So transitioning from the current pumping to the native groundwater number. To aid with that, the county GSAs expect to allow continued pumping on a smaller and smaller incremental level each time until we get to that NG. So kind of that graphic of here's the current use, the bucket's going to get smaller and smaller until we get down to that native groundwater number. So we're referring to this smaller and smaller quantity as something called, we're calling right now existing stored groundwater, or ESG. And this will be important because in some of the materials we use that ESG terminology, and so that's what this means. It's similar, you could call it transition water, you can call it provisional water. It's the water that we're going to try and glide path down from that current use down until we meet that native groundwater number. So as an example, in year 1, we take the current use minus our native groundwater number. Year 2, we'd use that year 1 number minus the annual reduction increment that we showed just in that prior table. So about 2,000 acre-feet in Chowchilla would get subtracted off each year as you go through this. And about, 4,500 or 4,700 in Madera Basin would go through this until you get to 0. That's what we have to drive to. So that looks like this, approximately. I know there's a lot of numbers on here. It may be difficult to read from further back in the room here, but we see starting at 100,000, and you're dropping this increment of 4750 for those first several years, and then we now jump for the last 15 years are now subtracting off 5,400 a year until we get all the way down to zero. The Chowchilla subbasin, same sort of thing. The smaller number the first several years, which is that 2% reduction, and then we got to speed it up a little bit in order to evenly match to get to zero. On the 12th of February, the advisory committee recommended each acre in the GSA would be allocated a half an acre foot of that native groundwater bucket. So hopefully this helped answer the question a little bit about what the native groundwater is compared to this other provisional water that we're going to be talking about. So in the Chowchilla Basin, if you recall one of the earlier slides, there was 21,000 acre feet of native groundwater allocated to the county GSA in the Chowchilla subbasin. And dividing by that 42,500 acres in that basin is about 0.47. In Madera, it comes out to about 0.50. So we've just been, since none of this stuff is absolutely accurate, we've been using a half an acre foot as that number that's talked about of the allocation to the native groundwater for all the lands within each of those subbasins in the county GSA portion. What's important is this is only for the county GSA. Other GSAs plan to manage their native groundwater proportion differently. So we're not trying to figure out whatever they want to do. As an example, Madera Irrigation District has said we want to manage our proportional bucket of native groundwater as one big bucket. We'll manage it with our surface water also, and we'll meet all our needs. So it's not each parcel or each farmer might have a quantity per acre. It's we have a bucket, and we're going to work our buckets together. We are doing it differently in this GSA because we don't have that flexibility, so we have to kind of assign it out to each of the acres in each parcel. Advisory committee, so now we kind of come to this ESG term, this existing stored groundwater. The advisory committee can recommend how to manage that annual ESG reduction. So similar to the native groundwater, the total available ESG for each year can be allocated by acre. And that bucket gets smaller year after year. Going back to that table, it starts at 100,000 in the Madera subbasin. It drops off by about 5,000 each one of those years as you get down all the way to zero. So you can allocate that by acre. We are going to present 3 different options for the conversation here. It doesn't mean these are the only 3, but these are 3 to have some good conversations wrapped around. Scenario 1, that existing stored groundwater is allocated equally to all irrigated acres, then reduced equally per year. So you take that bucket, and each year you look at how much you have. You're 10 years into this, you got 50,000 acre feet in your bucket. You're now going to distribute that to all acres, all irrigated acres equally. And in the example again, in the Madera Basin, we had about 85,000 irrigated acres. So you take 50,000 acre foot bucket 10 years from now, and you got 85,000 acres. That's the math. And you add that, and you'll see in a minute, you add that to your native groundwater that everybody already has, that half an acre foot. Scenario 2, similar concept, but here you have a slight variation where there's you modify that allocation to the irrigated acres based on what their current ETAW is. If you have a higher demanding crop, you get a little bit more. If you have a lower demanding crop, you get a little bit less. You're still working with the same bucket of water. In year 10, you still have 50,000 acre feet, but you're just allocating it maybe a little differently based on what the crop happens to be. And then in scenario 3, the concept there was to allocate that existing stored groundwater to all acres in the GSA, similar to what you do with the native groundwater, and then reduce everybody equally. So in that case, we're now talking about that in year 10, 50,000 acre foot budget spread across 178,000 acres instead of just 85, using the Madera Basin as the example.
Can I jump in?
Absolutely.
Okay. We just want to let you know there's probably other scenarios out there, and we're willing to talk about those. And I made a mistake and left the copies of the spreadsheet up on the printer, so Kim has gone to retrieve them because you're going to need them for the next part in order to follow along. So it might be a good point to take questions, if anyone had questions on what came up to this point.
Does the committee, Bill?
Yeah, has the technical committee seen all this data as far as the numbers that you presented here? and our other GSA partners that are going to be participating in this GSP that has some 6 GSAs, whatever the number is. It's a large group in the Madera Subbasin. Are we in agreement on all those numbers you presented?
So the numbers are all derived from the information the consulting team has been putting forward to the technical group for all the GSAs that have been participating in both the Madera and the Chowchilla Subbasin. Noting again, in the Chowchilla Subbasin, there are 3 GSAs doing one plan. 4 GSAs, sorry, I did miss Merced County, sorry. Sorry, Lacey. 4 GSAs doing one plan in Chowchilla, and in the Madera Subbasin, we have 4 GSAs doing one, and then 3 doing their separate, 3 additional GSAs, each doing their own individual GSP. But the technical groups have generally met with everybody together in each of those subbasins. This is the information that's been derived by the technical analysis, by the staff, brought up, proportioned out, looked at. We've talked about this glide path within that, that program, and as part of the actions that this GSA needs to take in order to try and reach sustainability. So yes, they have been discussed very thoroughly, and I think they're in agreement and understanding that there is this transition period that they understand has to occur.
I'll let somebody else go for now.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Clay.
On scenario 1 versus scenario 3, they both would have water markets?
So the idea of a water market, I think, should be limited and focused to the native groundwater, right? And so everybody's got their bucket of native groundwater, and that would be regardless of the scenario you pick. That market concept is still there to be able to move that native groundwater around. We're talking about in these scenarios that transitional water, that's what's being looked at as an allocation, and I don't think that is something that should be addressed or looked at as marketable.
If it's not irrigated, it's not marketable.
No, that's not what you said.
That's not what I said. When we look at the spreadsheet and walk through that, I think we'll be able to answer your question, or at least clarify, and then we can discuss further about where your question may be.
And
But
did your answer include both scenario 1 and 3? I would
my
think
answer
it'd be
to
different.
which?
Yeah, there are water markets available on scenario 1 and 3.
And 2.
And 2. The water market is for the native groundwater of 0.5.
Right.
And that's available in all of these scenarios, because really what we're talking about, this is the part where we're drilling down, is that existing stored groundwater, which is the transitional water, not the native groundwater, which native groundwater we think may be tradable.
Now, there's a whole bunch of ground that's not pumping now,
Yep.
that if a water market were created where those lands, the non-irrigated, could sell to the irrigated, wouldn't that change the whole formula for uptake?
That is, I think what we're saying is that the native land, the lands that may not be pumping right now, like grazing lands, have a half an acre foot allocation from your prior recommendations. That water would be, we've talked about having a market where that water could be traded to somebody else. Yes.
But it's not being taken now.
Well,
It's moving now, I'm sure.
it is kind of being taken now because we're extracting more than the sustainable native groundwater number. So more water than exists is being taken. It's just not being taken by them.
I see a
being
huge
taken by the
disparity
basin.
between 1 and 3 in terms of.
Okay, so let me, can I have the presentation back up?
Would you put up the slide showing the
Please. And I'm actually going to back us away from this for a minute, so I apologize. Where are we going here?
We're at the animation now.
Huh? Yeah, I know. This is where the animation is tough. So our current use, we're using this amount. We need to get down to this amount. What we're talking about is this differential between that line right there. That's what we're talking about allocating under these scenarios. That native groundwater exists here also, right? The equivalent amount. And we're talking about that's tradable as a quantity. Whether it's being pumped by a particular parcel or not, we're talking about that is potential to be marketable. So when we look at the scenarios, now to get back to the scenarios, apologize, we've got to walk through some of this. Here are the three scenarios. So scenario 3, what we are saying is that that portion of the bucket that in the Madera subbasin, we currently use 190,000 acre feet. That's what's in our bucket with use. We can only use 90,000. We got to drop 100,000 acre feet over 20 years. That's a lot of water. Scenario 2 says that 100,000 in year 1 would get distributed across every acre. So everybody has a piece of that in addition to their native groundwater. In year 2, you'd have 95,000. Everybody would have that in addition to their half an acre foot native. Year 3, year 4, et cetera, would just keep getting smaller and smaller until at some point, dividing 10,000 acre feet of a bucket across 178,000 acres might be unmeasurable. Do we have the spreadsheets? Did they show up here?
No, not yet, but I think you can.
But I think
move
I'm
ahead.
going to go ahead and get into these scenarios a little bit because we have parts of the spreadsheet up here on the slides. And I want to walk through some of this before you guys look at the entirety of the spreadsheet because there's a lot of stuff here. And again, these are scenarios to help have some conversations. Yes?
Could I just ask a philosophical question? Why is ECG water not available for market?
It's essentially overdraft, right? It
I
would be like
understand that, but
selling
it's currently being
debt.
utilized.
It's currently,
They're going to take it from you. Can't sell something.
go ahead, Bill, sorry.
Yeah. I'm going to regress a little bit because I think we got it wrong in February.
Okay.
I'm going to be very unpopular here, but I don't believe that you can give a water right to land that's not pumping water. They are free to drop a well and pump water, but other than that overlying right, that you have a right to drill a well and pump water on, but you can't trade that. That water it doesn't make sense to me in a water right sense or in a hydrological sense. And second of all, I believe the transition water, the ESG water, is the same. If you want to minimize harm to Madera County, then you have to ramp down everybody based on what they're using now. Now, that's just my opinion. If you're not pumping water, you don't have a water right. If you're pumping water, then you have a water right.
I would suggest we let Greg finish the presentation because we're jumping ahead to some of the important discussions you need to have then. And there should be copies for members of the public as well as the committee of the spreadsheet. Do not be overwhelmed. We will go step by step.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm just going to dumb this down for a minute. So we have, just to make sure I'm understanding what's going on. So I'm just going to use Madera subbasin. So total irrigated or total acreage in the subbasin is 178,000, correct? And you're taking out, or you're multiplying that by 0.5, which is the native groundwater, and coming to roughly 90,000, correct?
Correct.
And then the total usage for irrigated use, so what we need for the entire subbasin, Madera subbasin, is 190,000, right? Irrigated use.
It's the current use, yeah.
Okay, and then, so you're subtracting out that 90,000 from the total basin. That's how that number comes there, right? So the ESJ is just the 100,000.
Correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm understanding that correctly, and it might be helpful to some others that.
And then it drops each year from
Right,
there.
so you have 100,000 of this transitional water.
And year 2, 95,000 roughly. Year 3, 90,000. Year
Correct.
4, 85, et cetera. And
Okay.
by year 20, you've depleted that 100,000 bucket.
Okay, so the 90,000, we're not talking about the 90,000, the native groundwater right now. We're just talking about that extra 100,000 that's sitting there that's being used.
Correct. And
Okay.
these scenarios are about how you might allocate that 100,000 in year one, 95,000 in year two, 98, et cetera. The bucket, the smaller and smaller ESG bucket. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No, I appreciate the clarification.
Thank you.
There's a lot of different information here and lots of different ways to try and look at some of this. And so I think what Christina was noting there again is the important part is that we're talking about a bucket of water that gets smaller, goes from 100,000 to 0 over 20 years. And how do we share that to try and help transition, especially the current irrigated agricultural lands? Scenario 3 talks about sharing it with everybody. Scenario 1 and 2 shares it only with the irrigated lands, but in a variance. Scenario 1, just everybody starts off the same, or everybody gets the same chunk of that 100. In scenario 2, some people get a little bit more of that 100 than others based on what they're currently growing. We have the presentation back up. Thank you. So one of the ways to try and help illustrate this is we developed some kind of just examples to try and think through a little bit. So I hope these are useful. The first, we have 4 different farms. These are, obviously artificial farms to try and illustrate things that you'll see in the next several slides that are different parses of this spreadsheet. So first, we have a 100-acre almond farm, a 100-acre grape farm, and 100 acres of native grazing land, and then, as Christina likes, that I love using this one, 100 acres of olives for oil. I heard the laugh. So based on the information that the Davis Engineering Consulting team had put together when they were doing all the analysis in the sub-basin right now, the average ETAW, that's the consumed water from applied irrigation for almonds, is 2.83. So that would mean for 100 acres, you're going to consume to the atmosphere 283 acre feet. If your pumping efficiency is about 80%, you're going to need about 3.54, 3.5 acre feet per acre, about 350 acre feet to irrigate that land. I know everybody's farm is a little different and you guys operate a little differently, but generally speaking, we're trying to see that from that perspective. So we put both what's getting consumed compared to what you might be applying to try and bring that element of relevance a little more closer to home. Second farm with grapes, the consumed piece is 1.65 acre feet per acre. So essentially for 100 acres of grapes, you're applying about 200 acre feet. For 100 acres of grazing land, you have no ET, so you don't apply anything. And to do the math, I had to make them 100% efficient. So they are the most efficient irrigation mechanism out there because they don't irrigate. For the others, I used 80%. You can put different numbers on. It's more for illustrative purposes. For the olives, we were saying that they're using about 0.85 based on some various research that I've done in the past, and I've seen in some other documents from UC Davis and others that there's not good information, and there's some young olive trees in this county now for oil, but there's not a lot of data here. Elsewhere in the Central Valley, this number is about 0.85 per acre feet per acre, maybe even as low as a half an acre foot of ET. So we put this on just for illustrative purposes, kind of see how something like that would play out. So scenario 1, what we have here, and we're going to set this up for each of the farms, but to walk you through what one of these looks like so you understand what you're viewing. We have the native groundwater. You got the half an acre foot. Your existing stored water, in order to take that 100,000 acre foot bucket divided by the 85,000 irrigated acres, you got 1.2 acre feet per acre given to you. So you have a total of 1.7. So that means right off the bat, you need 350, but you're short by 140. Right off the bat. Year 10 is the next year. This existing stored water is going to go down it's the 2% per year the first 5 years, but I just went and grabbed year 10 and then year 20, so you aren't going to see that little bit flatter slope, but essentially years 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are a little bit flatter. But then by year 10, you have 0.63 when you divide the size of the bucket at that point by 85,000 acres. So this would be 50,000 acre feet of water to 85,000 acres. You got 0.63 acre feet per acre of consumed water, which then when you translate that to, you're about 200 acre feet short. And then at the end of the day, when you're year 20 and we only have that half an acre foot, again, this is applying averages across everybody, right? You're going to be 290 acre feet short. So essentially, you only have the half an acre foot. Scenario, or for the Farm B, it's similar, but what you notice, because you start off with the same allocation of 1.2, this is the equal allocation regardless of crop, you actually have a little bit of surplus. And so you could maybe market that surplus, because you could say that that's coming out of your half an acre foot, but it's only 5 acre feet, so I'm imagining that it's probably not worth it. But by year 10, you're short, so somewhere in between year 1 and year 10, you don't have enough water. And then you come to the same part where your existing stored water is dropping. Again, these numbers, existing stored water, are the same for each of the crop. In scenario 2, you'll see that existing stored water number differ, and that's the difference between those two scenarios. For native grazing land, there is no allocation. Oops. Sorry. Some problem with the pointer right next to the advanced slide. So the native grazing has no existing stored water allocation, so it only has the native groundwater, but it's got 100 acres of grazing, and it has 50 acre feet. This is what, going to the question about transferability or marketability, is that would be water they're always going to have that is available to sell to some of these people that might be short. That bucket of water is about, in total, for all the native grazing lands, is about 45 to 50,000 acre feet. So that's about all that's out there. If every acre foot of that was sold to someone else, it might cover the shortage in year 1, but probably not as soon as you get to the other years. So then if the olive oil condition, they happen to have a demand that's low enough that when they get that 1.2, they have extra water. They even have a little bit of extra water, but they can sell their native groundwater portion. They can transfer that and make that available. They're still pretty good in year 10, but then by year 20, they are short also. So now we'll go to scenario 2. Same setup of same farms. In this case, our existing stored water for the almonds is 1.32. Let's go back one slide so you can see the comparison. It was 1.2 in this case, and remember 1.2 for everybody, right? In scenario 2, 1.32 for almonds in year 1, and then it goes down from there. And then 0.77 for grapes. So you can see that more of the water is made available to the grape acreage, to the almond acreage. And so it's based on your ET. You're still short, but you're sharing that 100,000 acre feet more by, if you have a higher ET crop, you get a little bit more than if you're a lower. Is it significantly different? It might depend on your crop situation. And the way to look at that, native grazing is still the same, but the way to look at that is, in this example for olive oils, in this scenario 2, they're only allocated essentially what they need. In this, the way it balances out for them, they're at what they need in year 1, and they're going to be short year 2 and on, compared to scenario 1. Then scenario 3 actually has 2 different variances. If you remember in the earlier mapping, we showed a lot more native ground in the Madera Subbasin GSA than in the Chowchilla Subbasin GSA. The reason because of that fact, when you divide the size of the bucket across acres, you end up with a different number in these 2 scenarios for Chowchilla versus the Madera Subbasin. So we've put both on here, and they're headed with Madera up here, which would be the GSAs in Madera Subbasin, and Chowchilla up here. And the difference really is right off the bat. You get 0.57 if you spread it over all 178,000 acres in the Madera Subbasin, and if you're in the Chowchilla Subbasin, you got 1.41 under the scenario 3. So again, same information. You step through here. And what I think it's interesting that because of that split in the scenario 3 Chowchilla Basin, the grapes still actually have extra water, but they don't in the Madera Subbasin. That illustration right there on that particular line, I think you guys should consider. You don't have to make the same recommendations in both basins either. There are a little bit of differences in the basins, so that is something, just plant that seed. And then finally, olive oil, as we see here again, a difference in the 2 basins. So that's a lot of information. Here's the whole spreadsheet up here all together. You guys have copies. I think the audience has copies. It's challenging to read at its small font on 11 by 17, so hopefully everybody has the readers. and we're open for discussion, I think, at this point, right?
Yeah, and one thing I just want to say to the committee, remember that, yes, we've made some decisions, but a lot of those decisions were made on earlier information. Information has changed and is updated. So with that, we will move on to the committee. Questions, comments? Ralph?
I got a comment. Okay. I'm a very suspicious person. Why for 100 years, the state has not been worried about our water, or underground, or surface water. They haven't really been worried about too much of anything. Then all of a sudden, a couple of years ago, they become very concerned about us for our groundwater. Normally, in a typical situation, you farm, you pick your spot of land where you're going to farm. Usually, you'll look if you've got groundwater, you drill a well. Pretty soon, those wells don't work too good. You're done. You move on. That land goes native again. All right? That's how it works. That's how it's worked for 100 years. All right? Now, all of a sudden, we are all concerned about groundwater. And we're all concerned about sustainability. When does sustainability ever come into play? I think I got the thing figured out. All of these numbers you're showing us mean nothing to us because we are not the people that are buying water from Clay Gulf. Or as we diminish our water use, our vineyards and orchards are going to look like Hartway Gila Valley, abandoned. And the only value there's going to be to the land is the water beneath it. Okay? Now, I have occasion to deal with high-speed rail. And I found out something about a week ago I think would be very important for everybody to know. This particular man who's in charge of, hey, he's the one that purchases the ground. I told him, what is the need for this train? You know? And he says the population of California is going to double in 30 years. And we need housing for people that work in the Bay Area, in that area, because housing in the Bay Area costs $1.5 million for a $250,000 house here in the valley. Okay? Now, I think it's ridiculous thinking, but this is where their thinking is going. So they need the valley to develop the housing for at a cheaper price that they have to pay their people to work in the Bay Area. This is the point of high-speed rail. As stupid as it is, this is their thinking. To have urban growth areas, you need a 100-year sustainable water supply. If you can't prove that you have a 100-year sustainable water supply, you cannot build homes. Okay. What water supply is there that's sustainable from a surface? There is no surface sustainable groundwater in our area here. The only water that's available is the water underneath the ground. And we have to figure out a way to get that water. So what you do is you create a ½ an acre foot beneath everybody's property. And then these people, they can go and they can go on the open market, because when you guys did, Christine, where are you at?
Right here.
When we did at the Farm Bureau, when we did the example of buying water from each other and all that play, that show that was put on, did we have anybody there that was a big water buyer? Maybe someone that just invests in water, purchasing the water from the group? Or were they all just a bunch of farmers buying water from each other?
Farmers.
They're a bunch of farmers, right? We're being told that the water, which is an impossibility anyways, is that we're going to buy it from each other and we're going to survive. We are not going to survive. You can see the numbers that we're not going to survive. But the thing is, you're not going to buy the water from each other. Other people are going to buy the water. When you have to put in 1 acre of houses, just at 6 houses per acre, that's 6 acre-feet of water. That's 12 acres of land. I think they can hear me. Okay, that's 12 acres of land. If it's apartments, God knows how many acres you need for an acre of urban development. So what I think is being done here is we're being led down this yellow path, all right? And we're looking at the stones, but we don't look at where we're going. Where we're going is nowhere good. It's nowhere good. You can play with the numbers, we can have us here, and the part that really upsets me is that the government feels that we need to participate in creating the rules to kill ourselves. Because all of your numbers, nothing is a good result. None of them are good. 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, it's all over with. 1.7 acre feet of water, you can't even farm an acre of vineyard next year. You have to cut back. So I think what we need to do, we need to realize what is really going on here. What is really going on? And I suggest everybody in this room go home and get on their computer and look up Owens Valley and refresh yourself what happened in the 1920s in the Owens Valley. There was a valley like the San Joaquin Valley. It dried up. It's a desert now. And it just took a few people with a few politicians, and they took the water out of that valley, and it dried it up. And for the expansion that is planned for this area, they need the water. You're not going to get the water. The water is, you're being told you're going to go to an auction, like an equipment auction, and you go look at the thing you think you're going to get it. There's somebody there's got a lot more money and needs it way more than you do, and you're not going to get it. That's what I think.
Do we have any other comment from the committee? Jim?
So Greg, in the earlier meetings, it seems that it's my sense that the committee members, when they agreed to drop the usage 2% a year, did so with the expectation that we were starting with about what we're using now. Whether that was 3 acre feet or 3.5 or whatever. Under this scenario, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, we start out immediately so short that we can't even farm.
That's right.
And I mean, we talked about a glide path to ramp in to let this economy absorb a gradual reduction of acreage, whether you're a florist, a restaurant, an equipment dealer, etc. But under this scenario, there would be virtual, instant economic devastation because there'd be a lot of people that would be simply required to walk away from their operations. We cannot produce an almond crop with 113 acres of less than on 100. That's over. If we're trying to grow an almond crop with, just by example, 2 acre feet instead of 3, it's not going to happen. It's a disaster. You might as well not even start down the year. There's no reason to put out bees or anything else. You're done. So somehow it seems like we have to try to get back to where we were in the earlier meetings. Maybe we have to, maybe the percentage drop has to be more than 2% a year to get us where we need to be. But here, it's instant disaster under all 3 scenarios, in my opinion.
Bill?
I'll make it brief because I know this is going to be a long afternoon. But my sentiments follow with what the previous 2 speakers said. And my argument is, again, that you are creating more economic harm out the gate than need be by allocating native water all across every 175,000 acres, and then the ESG water, the same. It just doesn't make any sense at all. I think you take the ESG water and devise a scenario that it's split over the producing, irrigated agriculture that is in the non-district land, and that will be how you minimize the economic harm to Madera County.
So just to clarify, the scenario 1 and 2 does not allocate the ESG to native lands at all. So that is what I think you're saying.
The
but it
difference
does-
is the 6 inches, the 6 inches is the difference
It does
over the
allocate
whole
the-
175.
Right.
That causes that number that we start with, that Jim pointed out, to be much lower than what we had initially thought about.
Which is, okay.
The native water. And granted, if somebody is on pasture right now, non-irrigated pasture, that wants to drill a well, they have that right, I believe. But not that they've got water that can be marketed.
Can I ask a clarifying question? So to be clear, we're talking, you're suggesting perhaps a revision of the February recommendation, which allocated the native groundwater equally across irrigated and non-irrigated land.
As I already had said once already this afternoon, yes, I am. I think February 12th, we got it wrong.
And just before, Ralph, before I come back to you, I just want, obviously, there's a lot to digest by all of us, including everybody in this room. I don't think now is the time that we would even consider a motion on this. I think what we need to do is take this home, look at it, and come back with maybe some potential hybrids of what this could be. And so with that, Ralph, go ahead.
Well, yeah, that's true, but unless we're going to talk and violate the Brown Act, we're just going to go home and think about it. We might as well talk about it right now. But let me tell you, what you're saying, Newstone is saying what you're saying, because I met with him. All right, he's saying you should allocate all the acreage, water, native water, to the irrigated lands. That's what you're saying. All right, okay, yeah, maybe so, okay, but it's not going to matter that much. The reason that it will matter a little bit, all right? But the whole premise is they want to create a water market. That's the whole thing. So when they do it the first way and it's spread over everything, they come and pick up Clay's land first, okay? Then let me just run it out. They pick up Clay's land first. But it's not you that's going to get it. It's going to be a guy that wants to build houses. All right, he's going to go get Clay's land. And Clay, you're probably going to sell it cheaper than you probably could sell it for. Then because we can't buy Clay's water, pretty soon we have abandoned fields that we can't find water for. Pretty soon those properties diminish in value till they get to the point where all they are is worth the water that's under them. Then they buy those. Pretty soon, this whole thing is going to be Owens Valley. So maybe we need to take a whole fresh approach and say, we don't want to do any of this damn stuff. And just leave it like it is, and let's see what they're going to do about it. Because is that an option? Is that an option?
No, the county fully intends to turn in a GSP.
Well, they can turn in
because we would like to keep the State Water Resources Control Board out.
Let them come over here. What are they going to do?
We had a presentation on that.
I wasn't there.
Well, as you saw from my website update, you can review all presentations online. That was the March 21st one. Sam Bull and Brian from the State Water Resources Control Board came, and I think everybody in the room never wants to see Sam again. He's a very nice man, but we do not want them coming in.
I heard he threatened people. I heard that he can't. He says, we'll fine you, we'll do this, we'll do that. But I'll bet you he's not the guy that's going to come and try to do it.
Well, people have staff. And
what staff?
So the act that was passed by the legislature includes specific directives for the state board to fine, and it lays out the costs and all that stuff. So that was, he's been given a rule book that he is supposed to follow. So when you say he won't come down, yes, he will, or the state board will come down, and they have a fine structure and a fee structure, and they will implement it.
Just like my poem said they would, huh? Just like my poem said they would, with penalties strong. But you know what? Let me tell you something. We have to figure out, we have to see clearly where we're being led. Let's not be, if we're going to be brought to the lethal injection chamber, let's not walk over there willingly. We need to think about it. Maybe you're right. We all better go home and think about this.
So can I just have one quick clarification again? Remember, we're talking about the county GSA areas, and these subbasins include others, water districts like Madera Irrigation District, Chowchilla Water District, and with especially the way they're looking at it, and we've been talking to the technical team and the way it's presented in the GSP, their native water bucket plus their surface water on a long-term average is enough to continue doing what they're doing. So there are different circumstances within the subbasin depending on whether you are groundwater dependent only or whether you sit in a water district.
I sit in all of them. I sit in the MID. Most of our land is all in the MID, all right? But I'm still telling you, this is not good. This is not good, and they think that they're in a better position. They're in a slightly better position, okay? But it's not a good position at all, because we're all being put in a position where we're not going to win. We're not going to win. And these properties that you have that you're farming, pretty soon they'll be worth the same property that you have, that Clay's got, grazing land. Because you're not going to be able to buy them to farm the property, and you're not going to be able to buy enough acres to continue farming your own existing property.
Kevin?
I have a question.
Kevin first, Clay. Please.
You know, great, I don't like the numbers, but great presentation, by the way. It really helps to wake us up to the realities. And I think Jim and others have referenced this already. The glide path is something that as farmers, we want to try to make it as painless as possible, and then the county does too for property tax revenue and a whole bunch of other reasons. And back in February when we talked about and voted on what we voted on, whether, and I'm going to speak for myself, but I suspect others feel the same way. I don't think the intention was to do what's being proposed on any one of those scenarios now, but come 2040, that's how we would get there. Not now. So my suggestion is that we ask staff to give us another set of scenarios that would show the water allocations to only be for the first 5 years anyhow, and if not until the end, where the water would be, as Bill said, you can't pump less if you're not pumping at all. So that would help to lessen the steepness of the glide path. So that's my thoughts.
Greg, or Clay?
I have a hard time looking back on scenario one in terms of what Jim said about the 2% decline. Jim said, where did this come from? Is what I heard him say. How can it be so severe in year one? I'm pretty good at math. I had pretty high scores a long time ago. I practically invented the spreadsheet, the electronic one, after taking a computer class. And I don't see how this works.
So the 2% is a reduction of the 190,000 acre feet,
Right.
2% per year.
But
So it isn't
on the
2% for
on the
each.
pink numbers here in scenario one,
Can you put the slide
That's
presentation
2%?
back up, please?
the shortages,
I'm going to go back to, sorry, this is where the animation is always tough because lots of clicks to get back.
Farm A scenario one.
No, I know, I'll get there. I want to go back here first. This incremental reduction, so let's look at the Madera Basin. This number right here is 2% per year of 190,000 acre feet.
Right.
And so now when you say okay, we have 100,000 acre feet. Now, when you put that back out, it's more of the 100,000. It becomes a greater number of that,
Oh, I understand.
right? Okay. So when we look, now let's go forward to scenario 1. This is a little bit easier, so we'll look at scenario 1 here. So can you restate your question? Because I was also thinking about how to answer Kevin's in this slide. So Clay, restate your question first.
Well, it says he's 113, that's acre feet, correct?
Correct.
Short
You have 170.
on 100 acres.
Right, so you have 170 acre feet of water available for 100 acres of almonds, which means you're 113 acre feet short of the ET, right? Obviously.
Year zero, he had enough water.
In year 0?
It's not there.
Yeah, yours, okay, it depends
That's
on
this
what we
year, that's
are.
right now.
Yeah, right now, yeah. So let me see if I can also kind of answer what Kevin was suggesting with just looking at this slide here for a second.
Greg, if I may just jump in real quick, I think what's confusing a lot of us is this year, let's just use almonds in scenario 1, okay? Let's focus on that. According to this spreadsheet, we're going to use 283 acre feet this year.
You're going to consume that.
We're going to consume that. So a 2% reduction should be 2.83 times 0.98. That doesn't add up to 1.7. That's what's got us confused.
Maybe you could help us understand where the 1.2 comes from, because that seems like this is maybe the first time we're really seeing that number.
Yeah.
Right, actually what's helpful is on the back side of your handout is this other table. We look at year 1, we have 190,000. We take off the 90,000 that's been allocated to everybody, right? And you get 100,000 left. Now we divide 100,000 by 85,000 acres, you get 1.2. Now you add your native number back in, you got 1.7. Now one of the things to think about is if you don't allocate, let's for a moment go back on the decision from the 12th of February that was mentioned about not allocating to the native lands. That would be, you would have half of that 90,000 basically would be gone, or would be available for you. So you would basically subtract 190 minus 46,000. So you'd have 146,000 divided by 85. It essentially would change this number right here of 1.2 to 1.7. So everybody would get 1.7. And so you'd have a total of 1.7 plus 0.5, 2.2, which is still short, right, for that particular crop type. Other crop types, we're only showing a few example crop types on here. So that would be one thing that if you were to remove that native groundwater allocation and share it amongst the irrigated parties, it's a bucket of 46,000 acre feet roughly that you're still distributing, because right off the bat you got to start reducing this. And almonds are one of the higher water using crops, so in this particular instance you would have a shortfall regardless. Now if you did that same thing in scenario 2, I believe you would add the half an acre foot to this number, so you'd have 1.82 plus another 0.5, so that would be 2.3. So you're closer, much closer, but you're still even short there for the almond crop. And that has, again, to do with the overall bucket of water we have available in this GSA that we're trying to manage.
I think what I'd like to see would be.
And thank you for any spreadsheets.
I'd like to see an average of farm A, B, and D, leaving out native grazing C.
An average?
In other words, what the average farm is. I assume these are averages, or do you actually have crop acreages for the two areas?
So this was, it was based on the actual 2015 cropped acreage, was the acreage that was used for development of a lot of the water
So you've got almonds
budgets.
and pistachios and grapes
Right,
all
and
separated.
I actually had that up here
On
on my
a weighted average.
right, and a weighted average, so the acreage, oops, switched off the county one here for a second. So just as an example, the 2015 acreage of 85,000 total irrigated acres, there's 27,399 that were in almonds, 15,243 in pistachios, 16,417 in grapes, and it spreads throughout all that. Now that was information from the Ag Commissioner's office that fed that.
I'd like to see the average so that I see the 2% reduction. As
Well, so
applied
what you're
equally.
talking about is a 2% reduction for each crop. They're going to take a 2% reduction from their what? Their ET?
This is just not making sense to me.
Right. Well, see, the problem is I think if you take a 2% reduction from your current ET, you can't get to zero. Well, maybe you have 2% the first 5 years, and the rest of them become like 10%.
I'm talking about year one.
Right.
I think the biggest question, and I apologize, I will admit mathematical ignorance. Why are we losing 90,000 acre feet in year one?
Well, first off, you're not losing 90,000 acre feet. We're separating these into two buckets.
Okay, let me rephrase then. It's not that you're losing it. We're going down from what we're currently utilizing to a reduction of 90,000 acre feet. And that's a very large reduction in a very small amount of time. And it sounds like that doesn't meet the spirit of what was voted on in February. The spirit was we're going to have a glide path. This is a big speed bump followed by a glide path.
So I understand that, and let me see if I can try and explain, and we'll figure out, we'll try and figure out some other ways to illustrate various things, because I understand this isn't pretty, the way it represents here. So
Well, it just
let's
seems
look
like
at
we're
some
taking
ways.
it all up front when we have almost 20 years to actually deal with the problem.
Yeah, it's 100%.
Right, but if you look at, again, this table on this side, your year one is 100,000, and you drop 5,000 acre feet across 85,000 acres. And if you do that for 20 years, you get down to where you have to be. So that is that glide path.
Hold on. Finish, Greg.
Sorry, does that make sense? That is that glide path, that is a yearly step down over 20 years to get to a much smaller number. But let me try and get back to your first point there on there's 190,000 currently used. We've separated that into two buckets. One we're calling the sustainable native groundwater portion, and the other we're calling this transitional water. So those are the two buckets. One's 100,000 acre feet in Madera subbasin, 100,000 acre feet of transitional bucket, or this ESG, and the other is the native water. Now the native water, we spread over 178,000 acres. So what
Per the direction of the committee.
Per the direction, the recommendation, we spread that. So we have one bucket that got spread out, but you also still retain part of that. You're one of those acres, right? So whether you're farming or not, you got a half an acre foot of that 90,000 that got spread out. And now we take the other bucket and we spread it amongst 85,000 acres, and the two have to, if we do anything more than that, we pump more than what used to be pumped.
And Ralph, before you go, I'm going to clarify one thing, because where I think a lot of us are getting hung up, and trust me, I don't like this any better than any of you, but when we were talking back in February, we were talking about numbers that David's Engineering said we currently use, which I think was right around 241,000 acre feet. So when we're reducing this bucket in 2020 down to the 190, that is the big cause of this big drop immediately. So that, and Greg, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think that is incorrect. I think from the get-go, we were always, the 2015 data has been used for a while, and that the weighted average, based on those crop acreage, I think there's 15 different crop categories, the weighted average of crop times the ET of the applied water, so the consumption amount, at a weighted average of 2.24 acre feet per acre across the entire basin. So that, doesn't matter really how you add it up, since that's a weighted average, you were pumping a total of 190,000, consuming 190,000 acre feet.
And then you have
for
to.
the 85,000
Right,
acres.
and then you have to do the calculation to do that, when we're starting to talk about acre feet, as far as pumped,
Yeah, then-
is different than applied.
Then say, based on an efficiency of something, whether you want to use
Right.
70, 80,
70,
60,
75,
something.
80, right.
You've pumped maybe more on the order of the 240 or whatever, then, yeah.
Right,
it's
and I think that's where you're seeing the big drop, because if you're looking at almonds, and we're taking this big cut as of 2020, it's basically, you're getting 47% of what you're getting as of today. So I think when we're starting to talk about the 2% reduction or glide path, really, us as growers are going to start with, if you're growing almonds, you're going to have 47% of what you're pumping in 2019. So with that, Ralph, you had a comment?
Yeah, okay. Bill suggested that we don't take, you see, you guys are engineers and you want to have nice, beautiful charts, but when you put a chart, you say, we're going to reduce from here to here, the state looks at it and said, now, you said you're going to do it, so you're going to do it. So my idea as a committee member would be to recommend to you to play the numbers real loose and to stretch it out, like Bill said, over a 5-year period. Because if I understand right, the regulation says that we have 5 years to observe and try different things.
That's not a thing. That is not a thing.
That is not so?
No.
All right. Well, I want to tell you something. Greg, I noticed you have a wedding ring on. What you're trying to do,
This is getting personal. Are you asking, is this a proposal?
It's explain. Let me give you a metaphor so you'd understand what you're trying to do now. It would be like you trying to tell your wife, and I hope she's still alive and everything, that she's going to move from where she's at. And guess what? We're going to move to a tent in the river bed, but we're going to do it slowly over 20 years. That's what you're telling us, all right? And my concern is this. The state has never been interested in any of this stuff. The state has never been concerned with any of this stuff until 2 years ago. And there's a reason why, all of a sudden 2 years ago, they're all concerned about our water. And the reason why they're concerned about it is because they have a methodology of why they want to take it. Somebody behind the scenes wants to take this water.
May I quickly respond?
Yes, absolutely.
First of all, I don't want to take your water.
I know you don't.
Okay.
Just get paid.
Second, the water market as an idea arose from growers here in Madera County. That was why we applied for a grant for it. There is a groundwater ordinance that says water cannot be transferred out of Madera County.
It doesn't matter. I could change it.
I understand. What we're trying to do with this spreadsheet is reflect back to you your recommendations so that you look at this and you say, oh, that wasn't what I meant. Or, oh yeah, that's what I meant, but with A, B, and C done to it. So that's really our intent, is to have this be an iterative process with you.
And we appreciate that. We just don't like what we're seeing, and that's understandable. So Kevin?
Okay, so here's what, back in February, here's what I thought we were doing. And Greg or Stephanie, clarification, 2040, how many acre feet of water can we pump and be sustainable? About?
90,000, well, Madera Subbasin, 90,000 acre feet.
Okay, so here's, I'll just,
This pump consume thing gets mixed
Okay.
up. Compared to the 190 of consumed today, you can sustainably only consume 90.
okay, so here's my farmer math. Here's what I thought we were doing in February. Starting at 190. A 2% reduction a year over 20 years is 40%. But the compounding aspect of it, that Clay could probably give us real quickly what that number is. Let's just say that it winds up being 45 to 48%. So the 190 with the 2% reduction a year over 20 years winds up being 100. We're more or less in compliance at that point. That's what I thought we were doing. But the key premise here is the 2% reduction a year from the 190, not from 100. That's what I thought
And
I was voting
that's
on.
what we had, at least I think that's what I had attempted to calculate, was 2% was from the 190, and that resulted in this need to reduce a certain amount each year for the first 5 years, and then it had to do whatever it had to do to take it to 100,000.
But
reduction.
if it's 2% a year, how do we go from 2.8 in the almonds in scenario 1 to 1.7? That's a lot more than 2%.
Well, for almonds, yes. But again, we got to look at, and
Oh,
and-
I see what you're saying.
you know, I mean, it was one thing, if you assume you're 100% growing almonds, but we're
Yeah.
not 100% growing almonds. So, I mean, there's some variance there. But
Okay.
even that said, I know I easily have made mistakes in this, and I'm wanting to look at things different ways, because I don't like these numbers either. And I'm trying to look at them different ways to see what makes sense. And, you know, so we'll continue to see if we can think this through with you. But
I have some relative input.
Okay, can I have Bill go first, then I'll come back to you, and then I'm going to stop with the committee just briefly so we can have some public comment, and then we can circle back to the committee. Bill?
So I'm going to circle back to the horse I keep beating, is that the native groundwater needs to be allocated only to irrigated lands. That's going to help a little bit. The other thing is that the marketing idea is not a bad idea. Don't get me by the neck, Ralph. But there's going to have to be some controls on it. For me, the marketing idea is for the silage grower who's using 5 feet of water, and he's going to follow that and not do anything, and then there's some credit that can be marketed, okay? Not for pasture land that is not irrigated, and not for anybody to move to build houses, period. And I think we can control that. So that's the first point I want to make. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Clay?
I recall discussing the relative uses of different crops and talking about whether or not to make it equal across the board, I think, which I supported at one time, even in an email to Stephanie, or allocating it based on the existing crop and then ratcheting down. And I don't recall ever making a decision about that.
I don't think we did, and I think this, again, Clay, is where I think us as the committee were using a much higher number when we were thinking about the 2% ratchet down versus what is now being presented of just the 190. That's my recollection. I would not go by my memory at all, but I think that starting number and the 2%, none of us, I think, I can say for myself, I did not think that it was going to turn into a 40 to 50% reduction as of 2020. So with that, I'm going to step to public comment. Stephanie, I'm sorry. Christina?
I have a couple of clarifying questions that just trying to understand. Okay, so year one, 190 minus 90 is 100. That 90,000, the reason why you're subtracting it is because that's the 0.5 on this side, right? The NG. Okay, so it's there, it's just in a different category, correct? Okay, and then this 190, is this consumptive use or applied?
consumptive.
Consumptive.
And I think when we ran some rough numbers of applied, you know, again, it depends on everybody's efficiencies, you know, what they're using, but maybe on the magnitude of 230, 240,000 acre feet.
That was my next question. So that 240 number that we were hearing a while back was actual applied water,
Yes,
roughly?
that would be, yes.
Okay, that was my next question. And then my next question is, how did you get to these year 2 through 10 through 20 numbers? Because this is not 2%, this is some other math.
Yeah, some other math. Let's see.
This side, yeah, this side. Yes.
Right, so what it should be is a reduction of 2% per year of the 190,000.
Oh, not the 100,000.
No, not the 100, because if you do 2% per year of the 100, and you only have 20 years, you don't get where you need to get. You'd have to have 2% for the first 5, and then something significantly more than double, like 6 or 7% for the next 15. So you'd be doing, you know, if you recall some of the conversations about various stair steps and whether it was a cliff at the end or other things, if you took 2% of the 100,000, it would be a little flatter, and then year 6, the slope has to get much more, because again, we have 100,000 that we got to transition between today and 20 years from now.
So this is reducing the native groundwater allocation as well.
No, this is not reducing the native. The native always there. You see it in the spreadsheet, the native is still there in year 20. There's the native number, 0.5. And again, that's available to every acre. So I mean, you could, like as an example, in just trying to think through some of this stuff. So this maybe or maybe not works as an example. In scenario 1, you have a 113, in year 10, scenario 1 for almonds, you have 113 acre feet of water available for consumption. Let me try and do some quick math. Using 2.83 acre feet of consumptive use per acre, that's 40 acres. So you've taken 60 acres out to keep growing the 40. That's what that would represent. That makes sense? So you had 100 acres growing today, you're going to have to remove 60 of that to be able to fully be producing on 40. That's what if you translate those numbers, that's basically what that says. Then if you're at grapes, in that same scenario 1 situation, you have 113 acres at acre feet at 1.65. You can do 68, 69 acres of your 100 in grapes by year 10. So obviously you aren't removing that crop as quickly. Now the other thing is that, you know, this is where the transition, it was mentioned silage. Let's say you take silage out, and so that water is now moved over to the almond guy, and he's still growing his 100 acres, but he's collected it from some other people's lands. That makes sense?
Yes, but your math on this still doesn't make sense to me.
I understand. And each time the questions come up, I'm like, I keep scratching my head trying to make sure we have it right. But I come back to the big bucket. We got 100,000 of this transition water that we have to take down to 0. So how do we deal with that? Now the question is whether we go into the one question about whether we allocate to the native, then say we have 100,000 plus the native's water will pull back. So we have 150,000 that we have to take to 0.
So my understanding when this discussion came up and they decided on this 2% decline per year.
50.
So even with this math, so this in year 1 or year 2, I should say, when you take the first 2% out, it's 47. It's actually that actually equates to 2.5%. But then, wouldn't you take the 2% off of that total, which would be 186,000, we'll say? So not off of, like, I think the idea was you would take it off of whatever you're taking it off of, right? So if you had 100,000, or for simple math, right? So if we started with 100,000, you took 2% off, you're at 98,000. This is actually 2.5%, but you're at 98,000. Then year 2, you would take 2% off of the 98,000, which would be smaller. 90 smaller, right? You'd be at like 96,000, 95 something, and then from that 95,000, you would take 2% off of that, right? And that's how I understood it. And if that's not what the committee intended, that's why I'm asking for clarification.
No, I
Can
don't.
I give you the math that I used on that day?
Yes.
But so if you did that, just looking at the table, so you go to 100 to 98, let's just say it's 2,000 for simple arithmetic, right?
Yep.
100,000 to 98,000 to 96,000 to 94,000. In 20 years, you're going to be at 80,000, and you're supposed to be at 0. So some point in time, you're going to have to accelerate that significantly.
Gotcha.
So that's really that's part of the question is about this glide path and its shape. And again, that's a bucket for the entirety. It may get shifted and being concentrated in certain areas in different ways. And so you may end up still, you may have enough to still be growing, and I hope no one throws darts at my back, but you could have enough to just say, okay, we're only going to grow almonds. And we're going to maintain our current, whatever the acreage is of almonds, and we got enough for that, and the rest of the land is not growing irrigated crop.
Okay, and then one last thing. This is worst case scenario. This does not include any projects. This does not include any outside water that comes in. This is if we were to continue as it stands as of 2015 numbers.
Correct. And so bringing in water is definitely helpful. Challenging for the white area, as we've talked about in many cases, and will have significant cost. And so there's a cost comparison at some point in time as to the cost and value of that growing that crop for the cost of what it might bringing in the water might be.
And potentially, as the plan is updated every
5
however
years.
many years they're decided on.
Right. 5 years at a minimum. You can
Right.
do it more frequently if you want.
That essentially these numbers could still adjust based on like years like this one where we have random rain in May.
Noting that there's potential, but a lot of this was already done on a long-term average that picked up really dry conditions and really wet conditions, so it's supposed to have kind of minimized any of those variances.
If we have 5 years of
That would
great
be
wet
awesome.
weather.
And I would imagine that people would not need to pump as much because their soil would be pretty wet. You're getting an irrigation in May right now that's helpful, right?
Greg, if I could, maybe just, this sheet here. Year one, it's 100,000. 5 years later, if it's a 2% reduction a year, shouldn't it be 90, not 81?
And that's just what Christina was just saying. So it's 2% off the 190,000, not 100,000. So it's 2% of the total pumping that's happening right now. You're reducing that. And yeah, and there's some rounding things in there. If you take, 2% should really be of 200,000, not 190.
Jeff?
We're getting a line going, so.
Jeff?
Jeff Andyville, Milk Producers Council. Just on the math, the 190 was based on the consumptive use of the irrigated acres. So the number you start with, the 190, was what was consumed by the 85. And then you allocated it out over 178. That's where you got the initial hit, is you took a volume that you earned on 85 and you blended it over 178. And then basically it blows the entire exercise up. So that's the problem.
Can I correct that? Apologize.
Go ahead.
I don't think that's quite.
The 190,000 is how much was consumed by 85,000 irrigated acres. Now, separately, there's a calculation of what's natively sustainable native groundwater. That number happens to be 90,000 acres in the Madera subbasin.
Not the county area?
Sorry, the county white space, sorry, the county GSA in Madera, apologize, I know this is where it can get too many names confusing. So the 90,000 is what is the sustainable groundwater from infiltrating rainfall that falls across the entirety of the white area, and the streams that are percolating in, and the lateral flow coming off the hillsides and everything. That's all what calculates into that 90,000. That 90,000 was spread back across those 178.
No,
Not the whole 190.
I understand, but then you decided that we're going to, as a baseline, as our base, we're going to take that native and we're going to spread it out over the whole thing. But what you need is 190,000, and that's why when you look at scenario one in the first year, how come we're already short? Well, we're already short because we took our available supply that we're going to work with, the 190, and we averaged it over the 178. We averaged half of it. Our share, Madera County GSA's share.
46,000 of it got allocated to lands that are currently not irrigated.
And they aren't using it. So I'm not, it's up to the committee decide policy-wise, but this is illustrating the effects of that policy. So, and I don't know how you can ever overcome that and maintain anything close to critical mass in the county, in this GSA.
Yeah,
And I'm the one who did the math that came up with that day. Can I explain it?
Yes, please.
90,000 is 47% of 190,000, okay? 90,000 is a 47% of 190,000. That's the amount that needs to be reduced over 20 years. Now, to make that per year, you have to take the 20th root of 0.47, and that yields 0.96, or about 3.67% first year, if you reciprocate that. So we apparently compromised that day in not going to 3.67% reduction of the 90,000, but we'd pick 2%, hoping that there would be some new water. And that was the logic that went into our decision on 2% that day.
Yes, sir.
Keith Cedarquist. So there seems to be a lot of confusion, I guess, between the different, I guess, the way the engineers see it and the way the committee members see it. And so I think I understand the model at least. And I think that, like, the committee members are mostly, I guess, concerned about scenario one. Almonds using an example of the first year hit of basically cutting the water in half. Is that accurate? And so I guess, like, all that water is basically going to the fallow land, the grazing land. And so some committee members have touched on it, but I think you should revisit how you allocate that water, especially if there's no, I don't know when trading markets would come, but what happens to that water in year one, it's just, if it just sits in the ground, basically. So.
Thank you, Keith. And all of this is going to be revisited, so that's why we're looking at this now, having healthy conversation between all of us. And this will probably be tabled and then circled back rather quickly, I believe. Wayne?
I'd like to make a couple of points. I kind of like to build on what Kevin said and using just a little kind of farm common sense here in figuring this out. If we all reduce our water usage by 2% a year and 2% of what we're using this year and continue doing that, if we do that for 20 years, we're going to kind of come close to where we need to be, and we're going to have time to see where we are going with it, how it's working. This whole system is supposed to be reevaluated every 5 years, so we have the ability to fine-tune it and tweak it a little bit. To me, conceptually, this makes sense. If we're overdrawing 90,000 acre-feet a year, and there are 85,000 irrigated acres, well, if we each start drawing 1 acre-foot less per acre, we've achieved sustainability. It seems to me the gap between these numbers and what common sense is sort of saying to me just isn't there. The idea, I think legally, well, there are going to be lawsuits on all of this. I think we know things will start flying. A thing that is going to be looked at is, are you currently using water? Do you have a history of using water? Pasture lands, I think it's going to be a little hard to justify to many people, perhaps, them having an allocation for water that has never been used. So pertinent to this discussion, that is my point. As long as things are going to be revisited, I'd like to bring up another issue. I've talked about not all acres in Madera County are the same in terms of their native water. And I have a specific ranch I would like to throw information out as just an example of this. It's along the Ash Slough in northern Madera County. Chowchilla Water District uses it to transport water. In areas I have very sandy soil, they know they lose a lot of water due to transport. I took objective measurements, had Anderson Pump Company out, I think it was around February 1st, if I remember correctly, and had them out again. Well, the water district started putting flood releases into the slough, into Berinda Slough and all around there. About a month later, my standing water level had gone up 11 feet on 2 different wells. So on that particular ranch, I am going to have things to say legally if it's one size fit all, because I think I have a very strong real world argument there that just really doesn't work. So, thank you.
Thank you, Wayne.
My name's Larkin Harmon, and that was actually a perfect lead up to my question. Is the committee or can the committee distinguish the difference between shallow and deep wells, with the goals of SGMA being a reduction in groundwater storage? The shallow wells are rechargeable very easily. We have a similar situation. We have wells that were put in the 40s, and they're very shallow, hundreds of feet, less than 200 feet actually. The Bureau comes out twice a year, measures them. We're on the west side of Madera County, so we have decades of data that support the fact that we're sustainable in our area with the older shallow wells. So I think when it comes to allocations, there should be definite differences between deep wells and shallow wells because of the hydraulic properties. Shallow wells don't cause subsidence, and that's one of the goals of SGMA, is to not cause subsidence. So I think that since you guys are going to be revisiting a lot of this stuff, the differences in Greg's bucket, maybe there needs to be 2 buckets. Maybe there needs to be a shallow water bucket and a deep water bucket because of the allocations and the hydraulic differences between the 2. As far as contributing in our area, there's several thousand acres that are on shallow wells and existing shallow wells, I should say, that may help to alleviate some of the allocation when it comes to you folks that have deeper wells on the eastern side of the county. It may help reduce some of the acres that ends up being a challenge here.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Do you know the elevation of the wells you're talking about, above sea level?
The specific well that I'm talking about is, I believe, 140 feet deep. And so
No, the elevation of the surface of the ground above sea
I think
level.
we're at 113 feet.
113
I
feet.
believe so, yeah.
Okay.
So
And
we're-
Madera is about 250.
Oh, then I'm
At the
then I'm
airport.
incorrect.
248, yes.
We're out on Road 1, so I'd have to look up the elevation. I know my depth of groundwater. That's more important to me than elevation. But like I said, we're on all shallow wells out there.
It does relate, yeah, okay.
Sure. Yeah, we're at the bottom of the basin, so yeah, it definitely makes sense.
Chairman Avalos, we have one public comment to read into the record, and then we can close it.
Okay.
This is a comment from Nathan Frowsing, sent via email on May 14th. We would please like someone to make sure that when discussing the White District baseline, that the baseline requested is whatever amount of water is needed to fully water our almonds/pistachios currently. If the baseline is below that, on top of the 2% a year, we will all be bankrupt with dead trees. If the irrigation districts are not getting as steep of a decrease in groundwater per year, then we in the white areas need to be given maximum baselines since we have no access to surface water. That's the public comment.
Okay, and we'll circle back. Ralph no, I'm sorry, Bill, you were up first.
That Harkin brought up the topic of management areas, which is a whole nother idea. But I just want to, and those would be very pricey, I'm sure, but it might be something that we have to look at down the road for sure, because I understand the situations where it feels like one shoe doesn't fit all. We have got to come up with a way that the first 5 years create the least economic harm, and that the ramp down goes steeper after that. I just feel like that gives us 5 more years to recoup investment, and I'm perfectly willing to take out trees down the road if that's what I need to do. But the further back we can push this, and I think I talked about this concept really early, is that if we can use our transition water in advance, and then go to zero or no water, or if we possibly are able to bring in water in the future to mitigate that, it seems like that should be an option if someone can create that situation. The whole idea is to mitigate the ramp down so that the least economic harm to obviously the growers, but also to the county on revenue. Thanks.
Ralph, did you have another comment? Ben?
Well, I remember when we did the whole chapter, we started at a 4 per acre, and then we ramped down 2%. So with that, why are we going, I mean, I understand you're getting the calculations of the numbers, but why are we not starting with that 4%, or 4 feet per acre? Why are we not starting with that? And why can't we start with that form? We established that we thought that would cover every crop. Am I correct? That
4 acre feet per acre of an allocate, and let's just assume that's an applied water number, right? So back off of that a little bit for efficiency and say it's 3.5 or something for consumed water, right?
Okay.
For 85,000 acres. Sorry, let me just try and run the math here real quick. So 3.5 feet for 85,000 acres. If you give everybody that and you assume everybody has that, that's almost 300,000 acres. You currently only pump 190,000, so I'm not sure where.
I thought you said we pumped 240.
Sorry, you pump 240. You
Yeah.
consume, but
Yeah.
I tried to reverse it again. So the 297 is based on consumption. You consume 190. This would take it to taking 4 acre feet and giving everybody 4 acre feet. You essentially just said,
Forget about it.
keep pumping like crazy. And I don't think that's going to fly too well in Sacramento. Right, and so I think we had talked about 2.24, we may have talked about 2.4. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of numbers that fly around here, but I think the premise that we're trying to understand a little bit, and we can go back and look at the math, and we can talk about different glide paths, but we have a bucket, we have 2 buckets, a native groundwater bucket and a transition bucket, and how we share those across the lands in the county GSA area is what we're trying to figure out.
One quick comment.
Yes, Ralph.
You know, I think maybe a wise approach would be not to box ourselves in too much. You know, back in the day, they used to have these things called jackrabbit drives. And the jackrabbits, all the farmers would get together, they'd build a fence, and they'd beat the bushes, and the jackrabbits go over there in the corner, and they club them to death. And that's what they used to do. I feel like I'm a jackrabbit in this deal. I think what we need to do is we need to play it a little bit looser, and the numbers that you give them, if they accept your number right away, you gave them the wrong number. So just play it a little bit looser, and let's see how this thing works out with other counties. In other words, let's not be the one that be the jackrabbit that runs into the fence first. Let's just kind of hang back a little bit and see what happens first. That's what I think the approach we need to kind of take.
Well, and before Jim makes a comment, that, this is what we're going to come back with.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody be thinking of their ideas and options, including our public. And
One just kind of response to that last point is that we also are partnering, because we're producing one GSP with City of Madera, Madera Irrigation District, and Madera Water District. So there is, you play loose, and if they're like, nah, I don't like that because that affects our part of the plan, that's part of the consideration here, right?
Jim?
Talk to Dave for a question.
An hour and a half ago, this gentleman here asked the question about marketing transition water, and you both seem to immediately be uncomfortable with that. I always thought that we would be marketing transition water. Could you explain that?
Yeah, I'll see if I can try and make some sense of it as much as we can make sense of a lot of this stuff. Right now we're in an overdraft situation and we need to reduce. So if you say there's this transition water and we're going to let that chunk of water, and let's say in year one it's 100,000 acre feet, we're going to let people sell that around and move that around. Some of the other entities in the basin might also say, well, shoot, I want some. Why can't I get transition water? You're only getting it as part of your glide path to help you reduce your overdraft portion. But we want some just because we want some. Why shouldn't we get some? And that's an interesting, I don't know how to counter that question because it says, well, now we want to be able to play around with our bucket and sell it. Does that generate more, does that slow the transition of reduction such that you continue overdraft, which potentially has an effect on others in the basin? And I can't say that I've run all that fully to ground, but that is part of the concern with why the limitation is at the native groundwater.
And that's a limitation imposed by who?
Well, we've talked about marketing the native groundwater.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm telling you why there's kind of a sensitivity to that, but we're asking for your guys' opinions as a committee and thoughts on.
Is the transition water out of, no way can you put it on the market?
I think you'd need the express permission of all the GSAs in the subbasins in order to market that water. Because you're essentially, it's overdraft. It's like a debt that you're then selling to other people. So it's making a profit from the subbasin debt.
Well, under these scenarios, they're going to have to either go out of business or market transition water.
Well, I think the other thing to look at, if you have a bucket of 100,000 and you're quote marketing that 100,000, if you're still only using 100,000 and then next year only using something less and less and less and less, I think our goal is trying to reduce that overall use. The question of how that gets distributed, you could potentially just allocate in a way that would almost be the same as saying we're going to allow a market, right?
Crop basis?
That you could do it on a crop basis, but then you do raise, let's talk about some of the implications there. If you do it on a crop basis, my first question would be then, well, what is the baseline for that crop? What you were growing in 2015, what you were growing in 2017, if you had new trees, old trees, what happens if you got an allocation for almonds and you ripped out those almonds because they matured out? Do you still maintain that higher allocation and you get to keep transitioning that number? So there's all these other complications that come in and get really interesting to try and track.
The history of communism is that it doesn't work. The only way you can fix it is to have a market.
So county council reminded me that the water market, that we have a grant for that and we're about to hire the consultant, and one of their tasks is developing the rules for the market with stakeholder meetings. So it seems like that might be a good topic for that.
Jared?
I think, and I'll just apologize before I speak. I come off curt, and I apologize for that. I think when we're talking about the transitional water is, if I've invested a large quantity of money in developing a crop, and I'm looking at this outlook and saying, well, I'm bankrupt in 15 years. Why, as the investor, shouldn't I have the right to stop right now, and take that water and sell it to Mr. Maxwell. Mr. Maxwell wants to keep going, and I'm smaller than Mr. Maxwell, and I'm saying I ain't going to beat Mr. Maxwell. So I might as well let him keep going, and I'm done. In the way this is structured, we are overly limiting the rights of the property owner to at least have some kind of economic benefit before the end times that I think Mr. Peressi's right about eventually being true. But you should have that economic benefit. You're the investor. You're the one who has put your life savings, your family at risk. Why shouldn't you be able to at least rake something off the table before it's all over?
You should.
You know, just to further that, it hit me wrong when you said you would be making a profit from it, and his example is perfect. All we're trying to do, to the extent if we sell water, we're not making a profit because we are sacrificing our orchards at a huge loss. All we're trying to do is mitigate that loss.
And I think it comes from a difference in approach to what the water really is. To the landowner, the water is an asset. In your model, looking at the bucket is everybody's bucket. But to the person paying the individual property tax and the expenses, I can make the choice. You know, if I'm an almond farmer, I have the bees I got to pay for. Well, great. If I can't make it after 4 or 5 years, why shouldn't I be able to say, you know what, I'm not going to take on the expense of new equipment, bees, fertilizers, chemicals, property tax, I'm done. And just cash out now. And not being able to trade transitional water prevents that.
So I'm going to, at first I hear what you're saying, but as a counter thought, let's assume you're growing a low water use crop, maybe a hay crop, a low water use hay crop.
We can just call it almonds because that's what I'm farming.
Well, okay, you're farming almonds, I'm farming a hay crop, so you get a bigger number, and you're going to cut out and start selling this bigger number. I got a smaller number. I don't even use that much. I don't get to go do what you're doing.
So you're advocating for, I guess it was scenario 1, where everybody gets the same?
I'm not advocating for anything. All I'm doing is pointing out devil's advocate points about when they're different position depending on what you are growing, your perspective starts to look different. And all I'm trying to do is illustrate a different potential position about, well, what does happen if you started out with more and then you just said, forget it, and you ripped out your trees and you started just selling your water, your bigger allocation as it slows down. Well, I didn't start off with a bigger allocation. If I decided to cash in, yeah, I didn't make the investment maybe that you made. I mean, you go through all these different arguments, but that's the challenge.
Greg, the other thing though to remember is county property tax revenue is based on assessed value. And that almond or pistachio orchard is assessed at a much higher rate, thus the property taxes are much higher than if it's an olive orchard.
That fact is not lost on us.
Yes, well, but my point is, when it comes to being able to sell the transitional water, the county is already reaping the benefit of these higher assessed values by getting higher property tax value.
Ralph, before you, Bill's been waiting. Bill?
Bill, you got something to say?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not sure we're talking differently, but I'll express the way I see it, and then you guys can let me know if I'm seeing it different than you. I don't like this topic of the ESG or the transition water. I think, and you know, there's no way that somebody should be allowed to pull out an almond orchard and sell 4 feet of water because that's his ramp down number. I don't believe that would be right. I believe that he has some equity in water, that if he pulls out his almond orchard and goes fallow, there should be some number that he's allowed to market, whatever that is. I don't know what that is. But to mitigate the harm to the county and to the grower who has an investment, I think we need to have the water based on the crop out the gate. And certainly if someone were to pull out their almonds who's got 3.5, who's pumping 3.5 feet, you know, I don't think it would be right for him to go fallow and sell 3.5 feet. But maybe whatever that number is, spread evenly, 2 feet, 1.6, 1.8, whatever it is, yeah, okay. But certainly, if a if a double cropper is gonna fallow a double crop silage field that he's been pumping 5 or 6 feet on, I don't know, maybe he's got 5 or 6 feet of water equity to trade, or whatever that ramp down would be. I don't clearly see that, but I agree that, I just don't like the idea of the ESG water. I think that that should be spread over the crop land based on the crop water use as it is in January 1st, 2020. And how you measure that, there's other counties dealing with this. You know, not everybody's going to put a meter on their pump in 6 months. That's just not going to happen. But it can be done with satellite and consumptive use and come up with that number.
Ralph?
Okay, let's say, for example, you have your field and you have a half an acre foot under your ranch, okay? That you own, nobody's questioning anything about that. But you're out in the middle of nowhere over there. And you want to sell water, but they have no access, they have no ability to use your well and get the water to them. You see what I mean? All these people want to do is say, everybody's got a half an acre foot, and the guy that needs water is going to buy a half acre foot that nobody is going to argue about. When you go broke, or when you go under, you decide to quit, your land is going to be worth less money. The trees are going to be dead. You're going to have to pull them out. Pipelines are just, okay, then somebody comes in and they're buying that land for the same value that they could buy Clay's ground for, that has never had all those improvements. All they're looking for is the half an acre foot that when they put in development and they put in a well, they have the rights to pump more acre feet to sustain that urban development. And that's what all this is about. All these numbers and all of this stuff, it's all to get us to agree to go down the primrose path and to buy into this thing, okay, to allow a water market. It could be, guys, there's people already, right now, they're out buying ranches, all right, because they figure that that water's gonna be valuable in the future. They don't even have to buy ranches. They're having to buy ranches. They could just come and buy your water rights. There could be investor groups that just come and hedge on buying water rights. Look at the movie Total Recall. And that movie there of where they were selling oxygen on Mars. It's the same premise.
Well, look at the end of the movie, The Big Short. Same premise.
Yeah. All right, well, there you go.
Greg?
So I understand the concern and what you're suggesting. I just want to note that you had earlier said doubling population, just as a number.
Right.
County is approximately 160,000 people in the county, so let's just say that doubles. Well, in the Madera subbasin area in our GSA, that portion of the population, and it doesn't include the city, that's within MIDs and within the city GSA. So it's including people out in the ranchos and a bunch of domestic uses, and Fairmead, I believe, is in Madera subbasin. So they're in there. So anyway, just double all that population. Well, that population currently consumes less than 10,000 acre feet a year. So to go speculate, because we're going to go build houses for the doubling of the population, they're going to need, let's just take your analogy, another 10,000 acre feet at half an acre foot. That's not all the property.
No, I understand
Right?
that.
So, and that would be pretty significant to be doubling the population in Madera County in 20 years.
I would imagine this argument was made in Los Angeles many years ago.
Well,
Yeah.
I think Stephanie, obviously, we have a lot to do. So what I would recommend is we try to get something on the calendar maybe as early as next week. So we can, would next week be available for most of the committee to come back and?
What date does it fall?
Thursday?
Thursday the 23rd?
I can't use Thursday. Can you do Friday?
I can't.
Huh?
Shipping season, no, not next week.
Not this week?
So it seems advantageous to get the board chambers so the meeting can be recorded and streamed for everybody. So I would need to check availability. Thursday from 9 to 12 in the morning is free.
Okay.
I don't know about Friday.
So, and Ben, you could not, Clay, you could not attend, Ben, you could not attend if it's, as far as,
I can sit in for Ben.
About 2 weeks.
I'm Mark Bissett, I'm Ben's brother.
Yeah, you can sit.
So the rules don't work that way for the committee. But thank you, sir.
Also, I'm farmland in this county. Thanks to Wayne.
I understand.
Can you act as a proxy?
No, we,
It's proxy.
we don't have a proxy system set up. That would have to go to the board. I'm not trying to stand in your way. I'm just explaining the structure. So would you like me to query on a couple of different dates and then
Please.
poll it for availability?
Yes.
Okay, we could do that.
okay.
I'm not sure we have clear enough direction to revise the spreadsheet. What I heard is no one's happy, and I get that. I really, really get that. But we need a little bit more direction in terms of what to propose. And we'll also go back and do some legal analysis with Mike on what you're terming selling the transition water, because I think it's a serious suggestion, and I'm hearing that, but it also, to my non-legal mind, goes against reasonable and beneficial use of water, which is to say ag is reasonable and beneficial use. Selling portions of overdraft, I don't think are. So I think there's some real issues for us to investigate, and we can come back and talk to those. So could we have some clear direction on how to revise the spreadsheet?
The transition water should only be existing farmer to existing farmer, and we know that's going to go away over 20 years, correct?
Yes.
But it just seems completely crazy to tell an almond grower he's not going to work next year, and yet a different irrigator, he's fine. There's got to be some way to allocate.
So let us do that analysis and come back.
One of the scenarios obviously needs to be what's been discussed down here at length, and that is the idea of taking that original 90,000 acre feet and allocate it to the irrigated land only.
So revisiting the recommendation from February that allocated over irrigated and non-irrigated, and allocating that only over irrigated.
Yes, please.
Okay. Is there any other variation that you would like to see?
Bill?
Yeah, the other variation is to take the balance of the water and allocate it on a per crop use basis.
Which I think we have, isn't that scenario 2? We would just need to adjust the native groundwater number.
So you'll
Correct.
have your native groundwater on irrigated only.
Right.
And then the balance of the available water that we're going to use in 2020 is divided in a proportionate way based on crop water use on the crop.
Okay.
And then we'll ramp it down from there, but obviously we start there.
Okay.
It's
We
got to
can
be
do that.
valued. It has to have a value.
It has to have a value.
The transition water has to have a value to L. It seems like. It can't just be free. I mean, the cost of pumping, it's got to be beyond the cost of pumping.
Yeah, so what I need to wrap my mind around is I see that water as a debt, and so we're assigning it a value that's positive in order
I
to
don't know.
sell it.
What do the other committee members, and this is kind of off the cuff.
No,
quick
I think the
thinking
pump
here.
fee, you're talking about a pump fee, right? Would that be a pump fee on any water that's above,
don't know.
that's transition water? Because
Well,
that's going to generate
no, I
revenue
don't-
for the county.
If you're going to trade water between farms,
All right, let's say, because sometimes farms, if they're connected, you can do that, okay? Sometimes farms are not connected, it's impossible, especially in the white area. But see if you were in the MID, and we did this during the drought. We would pump water into the MID system, there was no water in the system anyways. And we pumped the water and we helped either one of our ranches or a neighbor. We just used their system. Isn't that what you're talking about? You're talking about using allowable groundwater that you're entitled to and either selling it or let somebody else use it if you're out of business. Right?
Right, but it doesn't have to be connected by canal or pipeline, it's connected by underground basin.
You're saying just allow them to use it, you're not going to use it?
Paper transfer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not using it, you can.
Yeah. Well, that would put more water on the market, that's for sure.
Kevin, do you have some?
One last thought on this transitional water. If my pistachio ranch is appraised at $30,000 an acre, it's based on the cash generated by growing that crop. And if Jared has an almond orchard that was worth $20,000 an acre today, and he decides to abandon it starting next year, this is just a number, you could debate it. The open land value goes from $20,000 to, let's say, $4,000 an acre. That's not a good glide path for the county. But once again, if the value is based on the cash generated, and he can turn around and sell his half an acre foot or whatever that amount of water is, maybe the ranch will be worth 10 or 15 or 18 instead of $4,000 an acre. So it's got a good glide path for Jared and has a better glide path for the county as well.
Maybe, Stephanie, your discomfort with this idea that we're sort of trading in a public asset here, maybe when those water transfers are accomplished, some increment of that sale goes back into the public coffers to compensate them for your perception that they have some skin in the game.
So we're going to think about this and talk to county council.
Right.
One other thing is we can't raise livestock on 1.7 as well, or 1.2. So livestock is going to be in effect as well, not just your almonds. So.
I believe we have sufficient direction, so we'll go ahead and develop things and try to get a special meeting set up.
You know, just by way of example, we farmed down in Palo Verde Irrigation District in the Blythe area. So every year, we would all gather in the district, members, Metropolitan Water District would come to us and say, we want to buy X amount of water. We would allocate that across by the acre, and each farmer could say, I want to take my share of that deal or I'll pass. And so it was about 20% of the farm. So every year we followed 20% of our farm and sold that water to Metropolitan. And, you know, that acreage clearly was the most profitable acreage that we farmed that year and every year that we did it. But the concept is not, it has some precedent.
So unfortunately, there's one more very short presentation.
I guess I should get back to the agenda. So we'll go on to agenda item number 9, Director's Report. Stephanie?
Thank you. So this is short. It's just 3 slides. Oh, but there's animation. Okay, so I wanted to give you an update on the status for various things that we as a department work on. We were awarded the Groundwater Monitoring Well Grant of $2 million. We went through a process reading with an outside panel as well as county staff and then did interviews, and it's been awarded to Ludorf and Scalmanini. We have that water marketing strategy grant, which I spoke about. We are waiting for the Bureau of Reclamation contract, but it has been, we have chosen a consultant through a process with outside reviewers as well. And then we're about to start on the process on the left, the rate study for the county GSA fee. So I'm going to draw your attention to this because people are sensitive about fees. So I want to make sure that you are aware of this. So we have the ability as a county GSA to assess a fee, the method has not been determined, for these sorts of things: communication, writing grant applications or administering them, technical support, professional services, legal services, studies and reserves and contingencies. So I would like to move this ahead with the help of the rate consultant in order to get the groundwork laid for water rights applications and for feasibility analysis in terms of large-scale infrastructure for groundwater recharge basins. So we can't do that. We do not have any funds to do that right now, but this fee would allow us to do that. So once the consultant is on board, they're going to present a couple of ways of doing that and do budget analysis and present that to our board of directors. I will make sure that everyone here is aware. So those fees, and I'm being careful to use the language of fees, those just go to the Board of Supervisors. But in the future, we would need a 218 process in order to fund large-scale infrastructure. So that's the sort of thing that does go out for a vote. I would include in there water rights permits and infrastructure as well as the basins themselves. And then I just wanted to show you Ellis Basin. This is the basin that we work with an MOU with Madera Irrigation District, where they allow us to pump water over to the basin. So that's their lateral, I think that's 24.2. And we rented a pump from Rain for Rent. And here's the pump in action. Water comes out of the canal and then it goes into a pipe. Eventually finds its way across the street to Ellis Basin. And we have put 35 million gallons in there, which is 100 or so acre feet over about 4 or 5 weeks. So we've had some success with this. This is one very small basin and small effort, but this is work that is doable, accomplishable, and all that.
Is that a certified flow meter?
No, it's the Rain for Rent flow meter. In terms of outreach, we've been working with Self-Help and Leadership Council. We've done some pop-ups. This was from the swap meet this week as we were setting up. And then I just wanted to remind you, if you see that flyer on the bottom left, we're helping the Farm Bureau and a researcher who is gathering information about people's attitudes towards SGMA and awareness of SGMA. My great fear is that there are pockets, maybe large pockets of people who have no idea what's going on right now. And that would be a pretty rude awakening. So please take the survey and encourage other folks you know to take the survey. They are going to mail it out again shortly to people who have not responded. This concludes my presentation. I'd be glad to take your questions.
Does the committee have any questions or comments for Stephanie on?
How much did it cost to recover 100 acre feet of water? All that you did there, how much? Do you have an idea?
Yeah, it's about $70 an acre foot.
That's all it cost? That's pretty cheap.
It's relatively cheap.
Anybody else from the committee?
I have some comments, but not considering.
Okay, that's public comment on Stephanie's report. Seeing none, we'll go to agenda item number 10, committee member comments. We'll start with Bill.
Yeah, my comment is that the County Board of Supervisors needs to be aware of, and with some language that's being kicked around, and it's called the San Joaquin Valley Blueprint. Some very high elevation concepts to try and bring some more surface water to the San Joaquin Valley. And so I encourage you to use that word, use those words. We're going to need help with the California administration, the governor and his secretaries, to become willing to spend political capital, because some of these projects, all of the projects are very badly needed, but they're not going to be popular. And the other thing is, if there's anyone here today from Self-Help or the disadvantaged communities, please come up and introduce yourself. I'd like to talk to you after the meeting. Thank you.
Is there anybody else? Clay, did you have something? Clay?
I'd just like to compliment Stephanie's leadership. I think she's doing an outstanding job.
I would concur.
Well, and I'm sorry about our presentation, just so you know.
I want to apologize. It's unfortunate where we are.
Yeah.
So, but We appreciate all that you're doing, Greg, Mike, and we will send that out early next week to figure out when we can meet again as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Any other committee members want to make any comments?
I had a question. Why is Chowchilla Scenario 3 better than our Madera Scenario 3 better? I don't get that.
Remember, scenario 3 was taking the existing store, the transitional water bucket, and spreading it across all 178,000 acres in Madera Subbasin, and because that diminishes the amount of water to everybody, so it's kind of like the native groundwater consideration. And in Chowchilla, there is less areas that are not being irrigated, and so when you do the division and the math, they get a bigger chunk. Does that help?
Any other comments? Jim?
You had asked earlier what we wanted you to come back with in terms of different options or scenarios. I think if we could summarize the comments of both the public and the committee today, they basically revolve around a scenario where we have to find something that doesn't put all of us in instant shock, where starting next year, we cannot sustain our permanent crop plantings, short of taking out a bunch of acreage. So that's what I'd like you to come back with, is something, as Bill said, that ramps us in here in a way that people can deal with mortgage debt, investments that they've made in equipment, and even businesses in Madera County, and frankly, the county itself, because those scenarios that have that huge cutback are going to result in a dramatic reduction in property taxes and impact the county budget in a big way. So that's what I would like you to come back with, is you guys know the law so much better than we do. You understand our concerns. Try to figure out a way that we can ramp into this in a way that doesn't put people into instant economic distress.
Any additional comments? Seeing none, meeting will be adjourned. Thank you.
Man, you should publish that.
You do a very good job. Bill? Maybe you're better at math than I am. That's what I saw.
I'm good.
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
I will do so. You do the same. Enjoy your son's baseball game.
I am too, so slowly but surely.
Are you one of the ones who planted?
Yeah.
Did you guys plant them up there? Okay, yeah.
And I feel like I should have grown silage for 3 or 4 years apparently,
Wow.
instead of making a move, but